In 2016, a terrifying darkness descended upon Anchorage, Alaska. In just a few short months, a string of gruesome murders occurred, each marked by the signature of a cold-blooded killer. From deserted roads to quiet parks, residents began living in fear and shock as victims' bodies were discovered under mysterious circumstances. There was no clear connection between the victims, no explanation for the crimes, only an invisible predator silently spreading terror. And if you haven't heard, Alaska is one of the most unique states in the U.S., with its vast wilderness, rugged mountains, and a cold climate that lasts nearly all year. Spanning over 1.7 million square kilometers, Alaska is the largest state in the country. However, its population is only around 730,000, primarily composed of native communities. This isolation makes Alaska a nearly remote region with a very low population density. The challenging terrain and sparse population distribution present significant obstacles, particularly in accessing public services like healthcare and social welfare, especially in remote areas that can only be reached by plane or boat. Law enforcement also faces numerous difficulties, as the state's geographical isolation and lack of infrastructure make maintaining security in many areas challenging. These factors have contributed to Alaska having one of the highest crime rates in the United States, especially in violent crimes, drug offenses, and sexual assaults. Although modern technology has significantly supported police in investigating and preventing crime, Alaska remains an exception where unique geographic and social conditions make maintaining law and order especially difficult. In the 21st century, Alaska is still a place where serious crimes can occur without easy detection. A prime example is the case of James Dale Ritchie, one of the state's most infamous serial killers, who shook Alaska to its core in 2016. In less than 2 months, he took the lives of 5 innocent victims. Alright, so let's dig a little deeper into the story of James Dale Ritchie, because this guy's life, it's like a tale of 2 different people. Here's a kid born on November 4th, 1976, who grows up in East Anchorage, in a regular family home in the Wonder Park neighborhood. From a young age, he's showing potential, like serious potential. He wasn't just any average kid at East Anchorage High. He was a kid who stood out, not only because he was this towering 6 feet 3 inches athlete, but because he just seemed to have that it factor. It was almost like everyone was waiting for him to blow up and do something big. You have to understand, in high school, Ritchie was living a kind of teenage dream. He's the star on both the football and basketball teams, right? It's 1994, his senior year, and he's just killing it. He plays alongside Trajan Langdon in basketball, a guy who would go on to the NBA and is now the GM of the New Orleans Pelicans, and Mao Tosi, who ended up playing for the Arizona Cardinals in the NFL. Think about that. He's rubbing shoulders with future pros. How many high school athletes get that chance? Not a lot. And here's the thing. James wasn't just some guy hanging out on the bench. He was a core player. On the basketball team, he was using that big frame as a power forward, muscling his way to the basket, and on the football field, he was an offensive lineman. People around him genuinely believed he was going somewhere. You'd think a guy like that would be unstoppable, right? Like he'd just keep climbing up the ladder, maybe make it big like his buddies. And small colleges saw that potential in him, offering scholarships. But Ritchie, he had bigger dreams. He didn't want to settle for just any school. He wanted the thrill of Division I, and it seemed like nothing was going to stop him. He takes the SAT, scores a decent 1,200, and sets his sights on West Virginia University. They even recruited him to walk onto their football team, so he's all set to go, a hometown hero off to chase his dreams. Everything's looking bright. But here's where things start to take a turn. Right before he leaves for college, tragedy strikes. His best friend, Quincy Thompson, gets shot and killed. Imagine that, a kid who's been like a brother to him, just gone, like that. Quincy's brother Bobby says James was practically part of their family. They had him over all the time. He was basically like a son to their mom. Bobby said it straight up. James was like a stepbrother to him. And then, just like that, his best friend is dead, a gunshot victim. It's brutal. And to make it worse, this happens the day before he leaves for college. Now losing someone that close at such a critical moment, right on the brink of his big step forward, that's bound to mess with anyone's head. That's a heavy weight to carry into a new chapter of your life. When he arrives at West Virginia, he's probably already dealing with grief, but he tries to push through. He's studying chemical engineering, which, let's be real, is no walk in the park. And he's trying to make the football team, but Division I sports are on a whole different level. Ritchie finds out the hard way that he's not quite ready. He doesn't make the team, and that rejection, on top of everything else, really hits him hard. I mean, think about it. This is a guy who's used to winning, to being the star. Suddenly, he's not just grieving his friend, he's questioning himself. He's out there, thousands of miles from home, without his support system, feeling like he's failing. And it's not like he has an easy major to fall back on. Chemical engineering is tough, especially when your head and heart aren't in the game. So, he starts to spiral. He stops going to class, and before you know it, he's out. He returns to Alaska after just one semester. Now, back in Anchorage, the Ritchie who comes home isn't the same kid who left with all those big dreams. He doesn't have the structure of sports or school anymore, and instead of finding a new purpose, he gets pulled into the wrong crowd. People who knew him probably saw it coming, but it's like watching a car crash in slow motion. Everyone knows it's happening, but no one can stop it. In 1995, he starts getting into trouble. He's linked to drug activities, and by the next year, he's involved in dogfighting, which is a brutal scene. You're talking about someone who went from this promising athlete with a full future to a guy getting charged for animal cruelty and drug-related stuff. It's hard not to wonder what could have been if things had gone differently. If Quincy hadn't died, if he'd made the team, or if he'd found a way to cope with the loss. But life didn't go that way, and Ritchie's story, which could have been one of success and athletic achievement, takes a dark turn. I guess what makes his story so compelling, and honestly so sad, is that it feels like he was almost destined to make something of himself. He had the talent, the drive, and even the opportunities. But sometimes, life just throws these curveballs that even the strongest people can't dodge. It's like a reminder that potential alone isn't enough. Life has a way of taking us in directions we'd never expect, for better or worse. In the end, Ritchie's story is one of unrealized potential, of what could have been if the cards had fallen differently. And that's the kind of story that sticks with you. Alright, so here's where things really get complicated in James Dale Ritchie's story. After dropping out of college and returning to Anchorage in a rough state, by the summer of 1997, he's trying to pull things back together, at least on the surface. He goes back to school, taking a class at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and he picks up a job working at a Carr's grocery store. It's like he's trying to get back on track, maybe rebuild a bit of structure in his life. But you can tell it's shaky. By November 15, 1997, the cracks start to show in a big way. He's now 21, technically an adult, but he's charged with cocaine possession after the police catch him acting fidgety while they're serving a search warrant at a suspected crack house. It's a small amount, just $45 worth, tucked into a mint container, but it's enough to get him charged. That said, the charges end up getting dropped. You might think he caught a break there, but this incident speaks volumes about where he's really at. He's hanging around crack houses, on edge, and clearly dealing with some serious drug problems. His mother would later say that he hit rock bottom in 1997, and honestly, that feels spot on. He's in a deep struggle with drugs, a far cry from the promising athlete he once was. And it doesn't stop there. Just a couple of months later, on January 9th, 1998, he's caught up in even more serious trouble. This time, it's not just a small possession charge. He's charged with felony drug possession and some other crimes. The police find him in an apartment during a drug investigation, and it's clear he's far from the kid who was once focused on sports and a future in college. When the police show up, he reaches for his waistband, and a .45 caliber Colt handgun slips out of his pants leg. He's also carrying ammunition, folded cash, and a stash of crack cocaine. At this point, it's clear he's no casual user. He's deep into the lifestyle. The apartment owner even tells the police that Ritchie and her son had been selling drugs out of the bedroom. Then there's August 1998, and by now, the transformation is complete. Ritchie has fully embraced the life of a drug dealer, even going by the street name Tiny. He's not just dabbling in the drug world, he's an active player. By this point, he's known as a dealer, and it's clear he's headed down a dangerous path. His parents refuse to bail him out after he's arrested, and his mother goes so far as to say she didn't even want him around the house anymore. She describes him as a time bomb, waiting to either end up dead or spend his life in prison. She even admits that she feels relieved he's behind bars, saying he's safer there than out on the streets. Imagine that. His own mom feels better with him locked up because in her eyes, that's the only way he's protected from himself. That's a pretty heartbreaking shift from the dreams they might have had for him back when he was a star athlete. In court, Ritchie himself seems to understand just how far he's fallen. He writes a letter to the judge, and it's almost painful to read because you can sense the regret dripping from every word. He talks about how he wishes he'd gone to a smaller school, somewhere he could have played sports and maybe stayed on a better path. He writes about lying in bed at night, crying over the mess he's made of his life and wishing he could go back to high school. Can you imagine the torment of that? Knowing that he once had it all, the friends, the potential, the future, and now he's stuck in this downward spiral. It's not just that he regrets getting caught, he genuinely seems to regret the life choices that led him here. Ritchie even says, "I want to finish college, I want to raise a family, I want to buy a house." He's dreaming of all these normal, stable things, but he realizes they're slipping out of reach. He knows that as a felon, he might never get the chance to have a decent job or live the life he once imagined. That's tough. It's one thing to make mistakes, but it's another to understand just how deeply those mistakes have limited your future. And yet, even with all this remorse, his mother isn't convinced. She's relieved he's behind bars, not because she's written him off, but because it's the only way he's safe. She knows the streets are eating him alive. From 1998 onward, his life is a pattern of arrests, mostly for drug offenses. Over the next 7 years, he's in and out of jail, never really finding a way out. It's like he's caught in this cycle, and every time he's released, he falls back into the same lifestyle. Looking back, it's clear that James Dale Ritchie's story is one of potential squandered, but it's also a story of how life can go sideways, even for the kids who seem like they have everything going for them. This was a kid who had the talent, the physical presence, and the drive to go somewhere big. But life had other plans. Or maybe it was his own choices, the company he kept, or even just bad luck that steered him off course. In any case, his story is a reminder that no one is immune to falling from grace, and sometimes, once you start down a certain path, it's almost impossible to turn back. By the time we get to April 25, 1999, James Dale Ritchie's life has taken a full dive. This time, he's pulled over for driving erratically, and it's one of those moments where everything seems to go wrong at once. Imagine the scene. Cops pull him over, and he's acting all sorts of out of it. He tells them he's had tequila, beer, and even popped a couple of Prozac pills. They check the car, and it's like the ultimate bad combo waiting for them. A loaded .45 caliber handgun on the passenger seat, crack cocaine in the glove box, and an open beer can on the floor. Guns, drugs, booze. It's like the trifecta of trouble, right? For Ritchie, this wasn't just a traffic stop. It was another chapter in the mess his life had become. He ends up pleading no contest, again to a controlled substance charge, and gets 3 years probation. It's like the system's still giving him a shot, hoping he might turn things around, but it's clear he's stuck in a bad cycle. Fast forward a few months to July 16, 1999, and here we go again. Ritchie pleads guilty to a charge of possessing a firearm tied to that earlier DUI incident, while the DUI itself gets dismissed. So, he's dodging a few bullets legally, but he's nowhere close to climbing out of this mess. His life keeps teetering between brief, desperate attempts to go straight and falling right back into his old habits. Then, in the year 2000, there's this curious moment where he decides to file for a business license for a vending machine company called Ritchie Enterprises. He even lists his parents' address as the company's base. It's like he's thinking about making something legit for himself, maybe imagining a way to support himself without getting tangled up in crime. But it's hard to tell if he was serious or if it was just one more fleeting idea that never got off the ground. In fact, there's no evidence that this vending machine business went anywhere. It feels like a mirage of hope in the middle of a desert of mistakes. Throughout 2000 and 2001, he keeps violating his probation, getting picked up for minor offenses like hanging out with known drug users and sellers or failing drug tests. One urine test comes back positive for marijuana. By October 2001, he's supposed to be in substance abuse treatment at the Salvation Army's Clitheroe Center, but he can't stick with it. The records show he got discharged for non-compliance, which is just a nice way of saying he wasn't following the rules. This whole period is Ritchie trying and failing to walk the line. It's clear he knows he's supposed to be getting his act together, but he's just not making it work. Then on November 26, 2001, he hits another low point. A new warrant goes out for his arrest because of all these probation violations stacking up. And between 2002 and 2005, things only get worse. Ritchie spends much of his time bouncing between arrests, parole violations, and halfway houses. He's basically living in a cycle of getting arrested, serving time in these halfway facilities, then slipping up again. He's not even getting a chance to build a life because he's constantly in trouble. On March 11, 2002, he pleads guilty again, this time for violating the conditions of his release from that 1998 felony drug case. Judge Larry Card sentenced him to serve 6 months of his suspended time, though Ritchie does get credit for the 41 days he just spent in Anchorage's Glenwood Center halfway house. He's serving time in dribs and drabs, but it's clear he's not learning from these short stints. By June 14, 2003, he's involved in yet another bizarre incident. He crashes a Chevy Blazer into a rock wall, leaves the SUV tipped on its side, and kicks out a window to escape. But instead of sticking around, he takes off, telling his probation officer later that he figured he didn't need to stay since a passerby had already called the troopers. He's picked up with injuries to his hand and knee, but has no sense of responsibility. It's like he's just making it up as he goes, living moment to moment without a plan for anything but the next small hustle. And then comes 2005, the year he's arrested for the last time in Alaska, and it's a dramatic one. Ritchie is caught during a home invasion, and this time he's found with plastic handcuffs and 2 loaded handguns on him. It's a dark turn. He's no longer just dealing drugs or carrying illegal weapons. He's now stepping into violent crime. The scene with the plastic cuffs suggests he's moved past mere self-destruction and into potentially harming others. It's hard to imagine the kid who once dreamed of playing college ball ending up like this, but this is where his choices, or maybe just his lack of choices, have led him. James Ritchie's life, by this point, is almost like a warning tale. From a high school athlete with a shot at a promising future, he spirals into this world of drugs, violence, and constant run-ins with the law. It's like he's trapped in a self-made prison, where every attempt at escape only lands him deeper in trouble. You can't help but wonder what might have happened if he'd gone to a smaller school, stayed away from drugs, or just had someone to guide him through those tough times. But hindsight doesn't change anything, and for Ritchie, every turn he takes seems to lead him further from the life he once dreamed about. By September 27, 2005, James Dale Ritchie had once again crossed the line. This time, it was a high-stakes burglary that brought him down. Police were called to an East Anchorage home in the middle of a break-in, and when officers arrived, they found Ritchie coming out of the doorway, kitted out in a black knit cap, gloves, and a dark jacket. He looked like he was ready for trouble, and he wasn't alone. His partner, Myron Taylor, was playing possum, pretending to sleep in one of the bedrooms, but it was obvious these two weren't just there for a quick cash grab. Officers searched Ritchie and found over $5,000 in cash on him, matching the amount missing from the home, along with some zip ties in his pocket, tied into flex cuffs, and an earpiece connected to a walkie-talkie, set to channel 20. If that doesn't scream heist, I don't know what does. This time, Ritchie didn't dodge the consequences. He pleaded no contest and was sentenced to just over 2 years in custody, not getting out until November 16, 2007. You'd think that might have been a wake-up call, but it's hard to tell with Ritchie. By this point, it was clear he wasn't just messing around with small-time crimes. He was out there playing the role of a serious criminal, carrying weapons, and using high-level burglary tactics. When he got out in late 2007, he headed back to Alaska, probably hoping he'd be able to stay out of trouble, but with his track record, that was easier said than done. Then, things get interesting. Fast forward to August 24, 2012, and we see Ritchie at the Indiana State Fair, of all places, posting a photo to Facebook. It's a small thing, but it's a hint that maybe he's finally trying to live a normal life, or at least pretend to. By 2013, he's left Alaska behind and moved with his parents to Broadway, Virginia, a tiny town where everyone knows everyone. Here he starts a whole new chapter, one that actually sounds like he might be on the right path for once. Neighbors say he was quiet and kept to himself, but he was helpful too, especially with tech problems. He'd even helped the neighbors' daughters fix their computers. In this small town, he was just James, the guy who was pretty good with computers. Nothing wild or dangerous about him, at least on the surface. During this period in Virginia, Ritchie even went back to school, enrolling in Blue Ridge Community College, where he eventually earned an associate's degree in chemical engineering. This is a far cry from the guy who'd been arrested with guns and drugs. It's almost like he's trying to go back to those dreams he had in high school. He's doing well, keeping his nose clean, aside from a couple of traffic tickets, and neighbors say they never had any trouble with him. It's like, for a moment, he's left the old James behind and started fresh. He even started talking about wanting a job in chemical engineering again, trying to carve out a life that had some stability. But as with most things in Ritchie's life, the peace didn't last. By early 2016, he was back on the move, leaving Virginia behind and heading to Alaska. Why? Well, part of it had to do with a breakup. He'd had a girlfriend in Virginia, but that ended, and he wanted a change. It's around February that he's spotted in Alaska again, though some reports say he may have made a pit stop in Las Vegas on his way back. Friends from back home noted that he'd settled into a trailer in the Penland Trailer Court in Anchorage and was staying in the Airport Heights area. People knew he was back, but no one really thought much of it at first. Some folks noticed odd little things about him, though. It was clear he was off somehow, even though nobody could quite put their finger on it. Ritchie's mental health seemed like a puzzle nobody had quite solved. He was rumored to have taken antidepressants at some point, but there's no clear record of any official diagnosis. A friend joked that he needed Dr. Calvert to come around and give him a proper diagnosis because, well, he ain't right. There was just something unsettling about him, something that suggested he was struggling with more than anyone knew. And that's the thing. Ritchie's life was this mix of almosts and never quites. He almost had a future in sports, almost went legit with a business, almost rebuilt his life in Virginia. But every time he seemed to be getting his act together, something dragged him back down. It's as if there was this invisible weight on him that he couldn't shake. And by the time he returned to Alaska in 2016, that weight was heavier than ever. Looking at James Dale Ritchie's life through the lens of criminal psychology, you start to wonder, could there have been early warning signs of him turning into a serial killer? Now, I'm not saying for sure that he would have gone that route, but when you dig into his background, you see some patterns that a criminal profiler might look at and say, hey, this person is on a path that's going in a really dangerous direction. You've got a young guy, right? Talented athlete, good family, bright future. But then you've got this major traumatic event. His best friend Quincy gets shot and killed. Now, in criminal psychology, we know that experiencing a close loss, especially at a young age, can mess with your emotional development. Losing someone like that can trigger what we call complicated grief, which is grief that isn't processed in a healthy way. Instead of working through the sadness, the anger, and the loss, it festers. And that's the thing. When trauma isn't dealt with, it can start to impact a person's behavior in ways they might not even realize. So for James, losing Quincy so suddenly and violently, it wasn't just the grief, it was the anger and the feeling of being powerless that likely stuck with him. When we look at his behavior after high school, there are clear signs of him becoming more detached from society. He starts dabbling in drugs, animal fighting, and eventually criminal behavior like burglary and assault. At this point, you could say he's showing signs of antisocial behavior, a red flag for people who may eventually engage in serious criminal activity. Criminal psychologists look for these patterns. People who start breaking laws for thrill or profit, who show little regard for the rights of others. And with Ritchie, the offenses escalate over time, starting with petty stuff like drug possession and moving to more violent organized crime, burglary, weapons, etc. It's like he's testing boundaries, seeing what he can get away with. And let's not forget about the fact that he's been in and out of prison and halfway houses. The constant cycle of arrest and release can cause someone to become hardened to consequences, which can be dangerous. People who cycle through the criminal justice system often feel like they've been abandoned by society, and that feeling of not having a stake in the world can drive them toward more extreme behaviors. It's a kind of alienation that breeds resentment and frustration. In his case, though, it was more than just getting locked up. There was that growing feeling that he was either going to end up dead or in jail forever, and honestly, he probably didn't care which. By the time we hit 2005, things really start getting concerning. Ritchie is arrested for first-degree burglary, and what stands out in this case is the way he's carrying himself. He's got cash, zip ties, which he was apparently using as flex cuffs, and a loaded gun. Now, when you look at a case like this from a psychological perspective, it's pretty telling. Most burglars aren't carrying around flex cuffs or loaded weapons unless they have some kind of intention beyond just stealing. Ritchie's actions here show signs of premeditation. He's thinking ahead, planning for things to go wrong. He's got weapons, cash, and even an earpiece, like he's preparing for a high-stakes heist or something. Criminal psychologists would look at this and say, this person is escalating. He's no longer just a guy making bad choices, he's preparing for something serious. There's also the matter of his narcissistic traits, which we can catch glimpses of in his letters and his behavior. Narcissism doesn't necessarily mean he's out here thinking he's the king of the world, but it can manifest in a sense of entitlement, where someone feels like they deserve to take what they want without consequence. We see this when he gets into trouble with the law multiple times and doesn't seem to really learn from his mistakes. Instead, he's just driven by whatever impulse he has at the moment, whether it's getting high, getting money, or getting back at the world for the way he feels mistreated. Narcissists often struggle with empathy, and there's a chance that Ritchie, over time, started losing the ability to feel for others or see them as real people. And, well, let's be real here, he also had some psychopathic traits. I mean, not to say he was a full-blown psychopath, but some of his behaviors do align with traits you see in people who have a lack of empathy, guilt, or remorse. He's breaking the law repeatedly, without really caring about the consequences. And when you combine that with his seeming detachment from the world and his own family, you start to see how someone like him might escalate into someone who has no qualms about taking a life. Ritchie seems to have been dealing with some kind of mental health issues, though we don't know exactly what. He was taking antidepressants, but there's no record of a formal diagnosis. And here's the thing. When mental health issues go undiagnosed or untreated, it can sometimes result in violent outbursts. People who struggle with things like depression, anxiety, and anger, especially when they feel like society or their family has abandoned them, can sometimes become dangerous. The emotional numbness, the feelings of worthlessness, and the intense frustration can lead someone to act out in extreme ways. It's like they reach a breaking point where they don't know how to cope anymore, and violence seems like the only option. In summary, James Dale Ritchie's path is one of gradual escalation. He starts off with some bad choices, drugs, crime, violence, but it seems like over time he just falls deeper into it. He's isolated, emotionally stunted, and increasingly desensitized to consequences. The more he spirals, the more dangerous he becomes. Could he have become a serial killer? It's impossible to say for sure, but when you take all these signs, his lack of empathy, the growing violence, the sense of entitlement, and the emotional trauma he never dealt with, it's not hard to imagine how someone like him could have eventually crossed that line. This is what we know about James and gives us a glimpse into the psychological development that transformed him into a true monster, choosing the path of a dangerous criminal. The number of victims he killed in just over 2 months is shocking beyond anyone's imagination. It's a count that few serial killers in history could match. But James Dale Ritchie was different because he was active in the 21st century, the digital age. This meant he was under constant surveillance from countless CCTVs, electronic devices, and advanced police investigations. Yet James still managed to take the lives of his victims without the police realizing he was the killer. So how did James manage to evade law enforcement? Let's dive into the details. The early morning mist on July 3, 2016 became a haunting memory for the city of Anchorage as James killed 2 people, Brianna Foisey, a young woman full of life, and Jason Netter Sr., a middle-aged man. When they were found, their bodies lay collapsed on each other. A cyclist discovered them at 7:45 a Malong Ship Creek Trail, becoming a living witness to a horrific murder. This case marked the beginning of James's series of terrifying killings to follow. Jason Netter was a familiar name to law enforcement, as he had been charged multiple times for drug-related issues, facing repeated prosecution for drug dealing and possession. Additionally, he had family troubles over child support due to his involvement in drugs, leading one of his 2 daughters to cut ties with him. Because of this, his daughter had stopped caring about him. Brianna Foisey was a homeless young woman with an adoptive mother, Marcella Foisey. Brianna was a young woman who had been caught up in the world of drugs, which led her to refuse help from her adoptive mother. She hadn't contacted her adoptive mother since becoming involved with drugs. It was only after she was killed by James that her mother learned what had happened to her. Upon receiving information about the case, the police quickly arrived at the scene. They cordoned off the area and took statements from relevant witnesses. According to the cyclist who found the bodies, police learned that he frequently biked in that area and had stumbled upon the bodies of a man and a woman lying together. Forensic teams conducted examinations and inspected the scene. The autopsies revealed that both victims were killed with the same type of weapon, but no clues about the killer were found at the scene. This suggested that the killer was very meticulous, leaving no trace behind, making it particularly challenging for police to identify the culprit. However, no bullet casings or additional bullet marks were found at the scene, only gunshot wounds on the victims' bodies. Determining the murder weapon thus became a challenging task. Nevertheless, the police managed to collect some ballistic evidence left at the scene. The police collected evidence from the surrounding area and made some unexpected discoveries. First, they gathered footage from nearby surveillance cameras, which captured 2 suspects identified as men, though their faces and identities couldn't be confirmed. Despite this being 2016, when advancements in DNA analysis and other investigative tools had become more modern, the police still encountered significant challenges in solving the case and identifying the killer. In the quiet night of Anchorage, gunshots shattered the peace between 3 and 5 a.m. on July 3, 2016. While most people were deep in slumber, a brutal murder took place. The sound of gunfire, according to witnesses near the scene, provided police with an important clue regarding the time frame of the crime. Forensic experts, after examining the scene, came to a similar conclusion. The killer had acted quickly and efficiently, leaving behind no trace that could aid the police in their investigation. He appeared to be highly intelligent and cautious, meticulously planning the crime. The absence of any cameras recording him only added to the difficulty of the case. 2 days later, on July 5, 2016, the police released surveillance footage showing 2 suspects. When investigating the relationship between the 2 victims, they found no apparent connection between them, as the female victim was identified as Brianna Foisey and the male victim as Jason Netter. The police were unsure if they shared a hidden connection. The murders of Brianna Foisey and Jason Netter shocked the public. Although the two victims seemed unconnected, investigators believed there was some thread linking the cases. The release of images of two suspicious men shed light on a hidden aspect of the case. Were they masterminds or just related individuals? Answering this question could help solve the entire case. Two murders, two victims, occurring on the same day and at the same location. Even though two suspects had been identified, the absence of any trace of the killer at the scene made it extremely challenging to determine his identity. Furthermore, the crime scene was an isolated area with few passers-by, and the police only obtained footage from nearby cameras. In the age of technology, using digital tools for investigations has become standard. So why, in this case, did technology seem powerless? Surveillance footage recorded key clues, so why couldn't the police determine the identities of the two suspicious men? Could it be that the surveillance system was insufficiently installed or the image quality inadequate? Although the cameras didn't clearly capture the killer's face, they confirmed the killer was male, allowing the police to profile potential suspects based on his physical appearance. It's shocking that in a time when law enforcement is so powerful, someone would dare commit murder right under the police's noses, seemingly unafraid of high-resolution surveillance cameras. To be honest, this killer is incredibly cunning and intelligent. He managed to evade all the surveillance cameras installed around the area where the two victims were found. Moreover, he used what was believed to be a gun to kill both victims. This exposes a significant gap in the legal system, as ordinary citizens are permitted to own firearms. The laws surrounding gun usage in Anchorage seem ineffective against this criminal who brazenly carried a weapon on the streets and committed murders. This could be seen as a serious failure for the Anchorage Police Department and the local legal system. Typically, a criminal committing such acts nowadays is almost certain to be apprehended and appropriately punished, thanks to trained officers equipped with advanced investigative tools. Solving cases has become much quicker and easier. Yet, in this case, the police appear helpless and face multiple challenges in investigating and pursuing the culprit. The public is raising serious questions about law enforcement's investigative capabilities, given that this brutal murder remains unsolved. Although footage of two suspects was captured, police have yet to identify them. This has left many disappointed and fearful. With the crime occurring in the dead of night when most people were asleep, finding witnesses has proven extremely challenging. The lack of direct witnesses has created an information void, shrouding the case in mystery. All of this adds to the enigma of the killer's identity, stalling the police investigation due to the scant clues. As a result, the public, now deeply concerned, has put pressure on law enforcement to expedite the search for the killer and restore peace to the city. Just as Anchorage was still reeling from the brutal murders of Brianna Foisey and Jason Netter, another similar homicide occurred, heightening public fear. The killer, showing no remorse, struck again. This time, however, he was less fortunate, as a witness saw him near the crime scene. This witness brought a fresh lead to the investigation, showing that the killer was growing more reckless, no longer hiding his intentions. Anchorage's nightmare was far from over. A mere 26 days after Brianna Foisey and Jason Netter were murdered, another victim surfaced. Travion Kendall Thompson, a young man, was mercilessly shot while biking home at around 3 a.m. on July 29th. His body was found at the intersection of Dubin Avenue and Boland Street in East Anchorage. The sudden death of Travion shocked residents further, plunging the city into a state of chaos. At the time, Travion had been riding his bike home after a long day at work when the killer ambushed him, firing multiple rounds. 3 women nearby heard the shots but were unaware that a young man had lost his life. They later reported seeing James lurking in the forest near Boland Street through their window after hearing the gunfire. They even saw him steal Travion's bike and leave the scene. The news of the third murder set the Anchorage police on high alert. Officers were promptly dispatched and the crime scene was cordoned off. Forensic experts meticulously examined the area while detectives interviewed the three young women, the only ones who saw James before he fell victim. Every clue, no matter how minor, was recorded and thoroughly analyzed. A gunshot shattered the quiet of the night, signaling yet another murder. The victim, identified as 21-year-old Travion Kindell Thompson, was the son of Bobby Thompson, a name well known to police. Notably, Bobby was a childhood friend of James, the central figure in the earlier cases. The three women living nearby reported hearing gunshots and saw a figure hurrying away on the victim's bike. This detail added complexity to the case, making it more unpredictable. Initially, the police suspected a robbery murder. However, preliminary forensic results led them to conclude it was not a simple robbery. The crime bore similarities to the murders of Brianna and Jason. Based on the three women's accounts, they sketched the killer's profile, immediately thinking of James Dale Ritchie, a man with a history of mental illness, drug dealing, theft, and a host of other crimes. Despite gathering some information about the killer, the police lacked sufficient evidence to charge James. Although he matched the description and was found with a bicycle believed to be the victim's, they couldn't definitively connect it to the crime. Thus, a deeper investigation into James began. As police probed further, they uncovered new evidence linking the three cases. Alaska's crime lab confirmed that the weapon used to kill Travion was the same as that used in Brianna and Jason's murders. With this information, the police could confirm they were dealing with a serial killer due to the connections and similarities across the cases. All three murders took place between 3 and 5 a.m., a time when the city was deeply asleep. This eerie coincidence suggested that the killer was exploiting this quiet period to carry out his brutal acts. The similar method and timing of each crime led investigators to believe that this wasn't random violence, but the work of a disturbed individual with deep psychological issues. However, what has puzzled investigators is the killer's motive, as none of the three victims had any connection to each other, nor did they share any common characteristics. One victim was a homeless woman, another a middle-aged man, and the third a young man on his way home from work. This led the police to investigate those with prior records of theft within the city. The police have made every effort to investigate the killer and to understand why he chose these victims. Typically, serial killers have psychological disorders, often driven to kill by past traumas or mental issues, which form their motivation. But in the case of the three recent murders, the police are entirely unable to determine a precise motive for the killer. All efforts to investigate have been in vain. The crime scenes, which they had hoped would yield vital clues, left behind no trace of the killer's DNA. He seemed to have committed a perfect murder, leaving no evidence. His escape on the victim's bicycle made tracking him even harder. The deeper the investigation went, the more it felt like facing an invisible enemy, a ghost lurking in the shadows. I'm truly unsettled. In every murder case I've known, there's always been at least one clue at the scene, but in these cases, it's as if every lead has vanished like mist. The killer operates with sophistication and intelligence, leaving no trace and outsmarting investigators. Additionally, investigators seem unable to find any flaws in the killer's method. He has led their efforts into a dead end. Police feel helpless and despairing in the face of this highly intelligent and devious killer. It seems the killer is seeking satisfaction from his depravity, relishing the thrill of taking lives. He may well be mentally unstable or suffer from psychological issues. In less than a month, he has killed 3 innocent people, including the son of James's childhood friend, Bobby. It's as if he feels no emotional ties to Bobby, nor does he care. Did he target Travion due to a conflict with Bobby or for another reason? There are so many questions to answer. It's horrifying. What drove this killer to murder 3 innocent people with whom he held no grudge? Could he truly be taking pleasure in the act of killing? Has he stopped? Or could there be other victims after Travion, possibly many yet undiscovered? I can't imagine Bobby's reaction upon learning his son was killed by a childhood friend. What will he do to seek justice? Let's continue to investigate this. The killer seemed to have stopped, but exactly 1 month later, on August 28, 2016, he struck again. This time, the victims were identified as 34-year-old Kevin Turner and 25-year-old Bryant Bree DeHusen, with the crime occurring at Valley of the Moon Park. The bodies were discovered by an unidentified woman who then alerted the police. Upon notification, the police department descended into chaos. In just 2 months, there had been 3 murder incidents with a total of 4 victims. The police were desperate. They had never encountered such a case. This wasn't just a series of murders. The number of victims was far beyond what they could have anticipated. Despite the advanced technology and professional training at their disposal, this killer managed to operate right under the police's watchful eye. Streetlights cast long shadows, creating a familiar yet eerie scene. At 1:42 a.m., a woman walking through the park spotted something motionless under a tree. Her heart pounded as her steps grew heavy. Approaching closer, she was horrified to realize it was a woman's lifeless body. In a panic, she quickly dialed the police. Arriving at the scene, police found Kevin's body beneath the park's awning. Initial investigations revealed Kevin was homeless and had previously lived at a nearby shelter. He also suffered from bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. The forensic team's initial examination determined he was killed by gunfire, similar to the other recent victims. It's believed he and the killer may have had a confrontation before his death. An autopsy report indicated that Kevin died from multiple gunshot wounds. After comparing it with previous cases, forensic experts concluded that all victims were killed with the same type of weapon, further strengthening the serial killer hypothesis. However, investigators still need concrete physical evidence linking the cases. Husen, the other victim, was a local environmental activist involved in numerous public service efforts to protect the environment. Evidence gathered at the scene suggested that Kevin and the killer had a struggle, and Husen, witnessing the incident, was likely killed to silence him. Based on police findings, Kevin was a homeless man without family, making it difficult to piece together what might have happened before his death. Husen, according to her father, was riding her new Schwinn bike late at night to meet a friend when she inadvertently witnessed the deadly encounter between Ritchie and Turner. As a result, the killer brutally murdered Husen to cover his crime. It seems the killer meticulously planned this crime and was terrifyingly willing to kill to avoid being detected by the police. He is indeed brutal and ruthless, killing without any specific reason. However, what troubles the police most is the inability to identify the killer's motive in all 4 cases. 4 cases with 5 victims, truly horrific and brutal. The killer did not hesitate to open fire and kill. Based on the evidence collected at the scenes, the police concluded that they were dealing with a serial killer, as the cases shared many similarities, such as the time, location, and method of the crimes. As a result, the police issued an emergency warning to alert the public. The Anchorage Police Department's investigation report showed that the crime scene of Turner and DeHusen had nearly no useful trace evidence left. However, a breakthrough came from the Alaska State Crime Lab, where forensic experts discovered a terrifying link between the recent murders. The weapon used in Turner and DeHusen's cases perfectly matched that of the previous cases, painting a grim picture of a serial killer haunting Anchorage. Recognizing the severity of the situation, the police immediately advised residents to stay indoors, avoid traveling alone at night, and steer clear of isolated paths and old roads for their safety. The Anchorage Police Department then partnered with the FBI to conduct an investigation, recognizing the danger of the killer and the importance of the issue. To ensure public safety, they knew they had to act swiftly to find and bring the killer to justice. During a press conference on September 6, Anchorage Mayor Ethan Berkowitz shocked the public by attributing the wave of brutal violence to gang activity. He claimed that the recent murders were mainly due to gang conflicts, dismissing the idea of a serial killer lurking in the shadows. However, his statement faced backlash from the public and some experts who believed that forensic evidence clearly pointed to an active serial killer. Following the mayor's remarks, the public was divided in opinion. According to the police's investigation and what had been announced, Anchorage appeared to have a serial killer who chose secluded locations and midnight as his time to strike, a time when people were least alert. This allowed him to act without fear of being detected. Moreover, there were no links among the victims. They were not associated with any gangs in Anchorage, and out of the 5 victims, only Travian seemed to have any kind of connection with the killer, though the police had yet to uncover it. The other victims were unrelated strangers who happened to cross paths with the killer. Since the FBI joined the investigation, they have offered a $10,000 reward for information on the killer or sightings of him after Travian's murder. They refrained from confirming the link between the cases to avoid tipping off the killer. If he realized that he was under the scrutiny of the police and FBI, he might destroy all evidence and the weapon used, making it even harder for the police, who were in desperate need of a lead, to capture this brutal killer. Within just 2 months of the reward announcement, the police and FBI received numerous helpful tips from the public, providing clues that led them closer to identifying the killer, 2 of which pointed toward James Dale Ritchie. The police and FBI were closing in on the killer and had prepared a plan to capture him and bring him to justice. After Travian's brutal murder, the Thompson family was devastated, grieving the loss of their loved one, who had been killed by someone familiar. When Bobby learned that his son's killer was his childhood friend James, he couldn't contain his anger and wanted to confront James. The news left him in shock. Travian's mother, Mandy Primo, declared that she had conducted her own investigation to uncover her son's killer swiftly and accurately. Mandy reported having tracked James's location near Alaska Regional Hospital in October 2016, stating that he was armed with a gun. She informed the APD lieutenant that she had found her son's killer, warning against approaching James directly since he was armed and she had her newborn in the car. Therefore, any close contact with him would need extreme caution. The mere thought of a chance encounter with the killer James fills me with dread. How horrifying. At that moment, it would be hard to think of anything else. I dare not imagine what would happen if I inadvertently became James's next unfortunate victim. What would it feel like to come across James on your way home after a long day at work? The despair in that moment would be overwhelming. I have tried to put myself in the victim's shoes, imagining the utter despair they must have felt upon confronting the killer. Perhaps the most tragic of all was Husin, who on her way to meet a friend, witnessed a murder, only to become the next victim. The victims' families have endured immense suffering. The lives of their loved ones were taken in the most brutal manner, leaving a pain that is beyond measure. Bobby must have been heartbroken, knowing that his son's killer could very well have been his own childhood friend. Husin's father surely blamed himself for not stopping her from riding her bike alone at night, only to lose his daughter forever. If only Travian hadn't been riding home alone at 3 in the morning, things might have been different. If only Husin had chosen another route, she might not have encountered the killer and met such a tragic fate. But those are only ifs. Nothing can undo what has happened. It seemed the investigation was reaching a dead end when the police and FBI still lacked sufficient evidence and grounds to issue an arrest warrant and prosecute James. However, at 4:30 a.m. on November 12, 2016, James was shot dead in a confrontation with Anchorage police officers Arn Salau and Sergeant Mark Patsky. What led these officers to open fire on James? Let's dive into the story behind this incident. At the corner of Cordova Street and 5th Avenue, a sudden encounter took place between Anchorage police officers Arn Salau and Sergeant Mark Patsky. While they were on patrol, they received a report about a man who had taken a taxi and refused to pay the fare. As the officers proceeded to investigate, they encountered James walking alone on the street. Officer Arn Salau approached James to ask him for information regarding the taxi incident, but James ignored him and kept walking. This behavior immediately triggered the officers' instincts. They followed James, using their sirens and speaker system to instruct him to stop, but he continued walking as if he didn't hear them. Officer Salau repeatedly called out over the speaker, urging James to stop for questioning, but James remained indifferent and continued on. After growing frustrated with Officer Salau's repeated request to stop, James suddenly pulled out a Colt Python revolver, approached Officer Salau's patrol car, and fired at him. Caught off guard by the attack, Officer Salau was hit 6 times with bullets striking his bones, liver, and intestines. In response, Salau exited his vehicle and returned fire, as James's actions clearly constituted an assault on law enforcement. Hearing the gunshots and realizing a confrontation was underway, Sergeant Mark Patsky joined the shootout and fired at James. When the gunfire ceased, James was pronounced dead at the scene. Due to his serious injuries, Officer Salau was rushed to the hospital, where he underwent surgery to remove the bullets from his body. After 7 hours in the operating room, doctors were able to stabilize his condition, but he required intensive monitoring and rest in a critical care unit for a full recovery. The news of James's death shocked the public. As the primary suspect in the deaths of 5 people and other shocking murders in Anchorage, many had hoped to see him face justice in court for the suffering he caused to his victims' loved ones. When Anchorage residents learned of James's death, many were relieved, as they no longer had to live in fear of becoming his next victim or face a repeat of such horrific crimes. Following James's death, the gun he had used in the encounter was sent for forensic examination. The results were chilling. The Colt Python .357 revolver, a 6-round weapon commonly used in these types of crimes, was conclusively identified as the murder weapon used in the previous killings of Brianna, Jason, Travian, Kevin, and Hussein. This revelation hit the police and investigators hard. They were shocked to learn that the serial killer responsible for so many deaths had been living right under their noses. The gun was purchased by James after he moved to Alaska following a 2-year prison sentence. James had previously loaned the weapon to a friend, retrieved it, and later moved to Airport Heights before relocating to Penland Parkway in Anchorage. While James had sought mental health treatment, the Anchorage Police Department, APD, could not determine whether he had been formally diagnosed. For years, Anchorage residents unknowingly lived alongside a disturbed killer who was skillfully hiding in plain sight. To evade suspicion, James presented himself as a law-abiding citizen, avoiding any local violations following his release from prison. This carefully constructed facade made it difficult for anyone to recognize his true intentions. Without the forensic findings from Alaska's crime lab, James's crimes might have remained hidden. Witnesses to the murders were non-existent, and no evidence could definitively place James at any of the crime scenes. He was only initially suspected of killing Bobby's son, Travian. Throughout this period, Anchorage's residents had unknowingly coexisted with a depraved murderer hiding a twisted psyche. James's cleverness and careful planning were truly remarkable. He had meticulously constructed a disguise, fooling everyone, including law enforcement and investigators, with no criminal record or infraction to raise any suspicion. He seemingly had a detailed plan in place that allowed him to commit his crimes without leaving a trace. James was exceptionally skilled in choosing the time and location of his attacks. The victims were all found in remote, desolate areas, and the times they were attacked were late at night when streets were empty. This choice of timing allowed James to carry out his attacks unseen, as he was like a ghost haunting Anchorage. Additionally, James seemed to have studied his victims' routines and habits, planning his attacks so meticulously that he left no evidence, no DNA, blood, fingerprints, or other traces at the crime scenes. Security cameras never captured his image or face, adding to the illusion of a phantom-like killer moving undetected among Anchorage's streets. James, with his calm and ordinary appearance, concealed an astonishingly cunning and devious mind. He turned the night into his ally, using darkness to evade all surveillance. Every step James took was meticulously calculated. Each small detail was perfectly arranged, like a chess game in which he held the winning moves. The image of James slipping through hidden corners and weaving through dark alleys was spine-chilling, like an invisible specter roaming freely through the peaceful city of Anchorage. All barriers and security systems were rendered useless by his thorough preparation. The more I learned about James, the more horrified I became at the sophistication of his plans. Everything was premeditated, from choosing crime scenes to hiding evidence. He turned Anchorage into his own stage, where he unleashed his brutal killer instincts. Investigators revealed that James hadn't committed any significant offenses in over 10 years, maintaining the appearance of a law-abiding citizen. They had entirely overlooked him in prior investigations, not suspecting that he could camouflage himself so perfectly. After 3 days of investigation, investigators reached out to the victims' families. Anchorage Police Chief Chris Tolley held a press conference to announce this grave situation. During the conference, he disclosed the connection between James and the Anchorage murders, as well as the recent attack on Officer Salau. He stated that investigators from the Anchorage Police Department and the FBI task force had identified James as the murderer of Travian, one of the 5 victims in 3 recent cases, as well as the assailant in Officer Salau's attack on November 12, 2016. Additionally, Lieutenant John McKinnon confirmed the link between the cases, which the task force had kept confidential, fearing that an early announcement could prompt James to destroy the gun and other crucial evidence. That's why they withheld this information until now. Through the in-depth investigation by the police and FBI, it was found that the Colt Python gun was purchased in 1971, but James was not its first owner. After his prison sentence, James purchased the gun from another person. He later lent it to a friend before moving to Broadway, Virginia, to live with his parents. After breaking up with his girlfriend and returning to Alaska, James retrieved the gun from his friend. The gun's previous owner was summoned to assist in the investigation, and he informed the police that he only handled the transaction with James. He claimed to be unaware of what James intended to use the gun for and hadn't seen him in a long time, so he knew nothing about James's behavior. Although the clues from the gun were sparse, they helped advance the investigation and revealed more details about James's life after his release from prison. The gun's trail gave the police insight into how James obtained this weapon. According to Alaska's laws, gun ownership requires a permit from high-ranking city officials, along with usage restrictions. Guns are not toys. Misuse could result in cases similar to these recent crimes. The existence of an underground weapon trade within the prison system, a place that symbolizes justice and order, is alarming. This raises serious questions about flaws in prison management and law enforcement. How could deadly firearms slip into a highly controlled environment so easily? Was there collusion from those in power or simply negligence from those responsible for security? That James, a cold-blooded killer, could access a weapon while in prison exposed a troubling reality. No matter how strict laws may be, they become meaningless if not enforced rigorously. The system's vulnerabilities allowed criminals like James to operate and spread terror in society. But the pressing question is, why do these gaps persist? Are the current laws insufficiently deterrent, or does the issue lie in enforcement? And above all, who will bear responsibility for the unforeseen consequences of illegal arms trading? I can hardly understand how James was able to commit so many crimes without anyone suspecting him. In this age of advanced technology, with high-tech systems dedicated to tracking criminals and police forces trained to the highest standards, how could he only be uncovered after he was killed in a confrontation with police? I cannot understand what the police were investigating all this time. As APD investigators dug deeper into James's crimes, they suspected that there might be more victims he killed that were yet to be discovered. It was possible there were other cases connected to James's gun that hadn't been uncovered. Consequently, the FBI began investigating and closely tracking all of James's activities in Virginia and Nevada before he returned to Alaska in 2016. Thanks to this detailed investigation, police uncovered that James had a past involving drugs and theft. This wasn't his first encounter with the law. According to their findings, James committed his first crime in 1995, right after dropping out of school and returning to Alaska. He had a long criminal history, with his last offense before prison involving unlawful entry and the illegal possession and use of firearms. As the investigation into James's past deepened, a broader picture of a dangerous criminal gradually emerged. It turned out that the recent murder was just one link in a chain of crimes he had committed. James's extensive criminal record revealed a history of thefts and more severe acts of violence. Notably, his previous arrest for illegal possession and use of firearms provided an answer to the mystery of the Colt Python, the weapon used in the recent murders. With the evidence collected, investigators began to piece together a portrait of a sophisticated and ruthless criminal. They found that behind James's ordinary exterior lay a twisted psyche, someone who craved power and was willing to do anything to satisfy his desires. The deeper the investigation went, the more investigators believed that James's motives for the murders weren't just for money or revenge, but contained far darker secrets. It was revealed that James had previously undergone psychiatric treatment, leading many to believe that he may have committed the crimes while his mental state was impaired or unstable. It was likely that he killed for the thrill of murder while not fully in control of his mind. Murderers with a history of mental illness often cannot control their impulses. History has seen similar killers, such as Ted Bundy and Israel Keyes, both of whom had high IQs but twisted, warped psyches. In the history of the United States, and especially in Alaska, there have been many cold-blooded, brutal, and twisted murderers. However, James was the only one to emerge in the modern era when advanced technology has been developed and widely applied. After months of meticulous investigation, on April 26, 2017, a shocking announcement was made by the Anchorage Police Department. Police spokesperson Renee Oistad, in a serious tone, officially confirmed that James was the killer in a series of murders that had shocked the city. Investigators had gathered enough scientific evidence and eyewitness testimonies to conclude that James was solely responsible for the 5 brutal murders that had occurred in recent weeks. Thanks to relentless efforts, the investigators were able to bring James's crimes into the light. However, since James had been shot dead in a previous confrontation with the police, he would never face justice for his crimes. Nonetheless, he had already paid a heavy price for resisting law enforcement. Through careful investigation, forensic scientists successfully traced the origin of the Colt Python handgun, the weapon used in the recent murders. By analyzing bullet traces found at the crime scenes, experts concluded that all the bullets had been fired from the same gun. More importantly, by cross-referencing the serial number of the cartridge cases with a firearms database, police confirmed that the gun had been owned by James. On May 23, 2017, the Anchorage Police Department released footage from a camera mounted on a vehicle, recorded just before the confrontation between Ritchie and Salau, along with details about James's personal history. The official statement from Renee Oistad marked the end of Anchorage's long period of fear. Identifying the killer provided a sense of relief, but it also closed a dark chapter in the city's history. However, the pain of loss remained for the families of the victims. The question of James's true motive for killing 5 people with no apparent connection to him, and the dark secrets hidden behind these brutal murders, remained unanswered, leaving the public deeply unsettled. In the end, the case was closed, but it left many lingering questions for the public. The first concern was James's motive for killing 5 people in less than 2 months. The second was why he chose victims with no pattern, no relation to him, no shared lifestyle, no clear connection. Additionally, one of the victims was the son of his childhood friend. I truly felt disturbed after investigating this case, as it raised many unresolved questions. The way the investigators identified the killer was also fraught with difficulties. They faced numerous obstacles when investigating this complex case and the killer himself. It seemed that the killer was an expert at hiding his tracks. He successfully led the police, the FBI, and the entire city of Anchorage astray. Yet in the end, he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Justice may come late, but it is always present, fighting against evil and restoring peace to the community. The story of these murders also reflects another painful reality: the fragility of justice and the complexity of solving crimes. When Ritchie was revealed to be the primary culprit in all the murders, it made us question the gaps in the legal system and the external factors that allowed him to commit his crimes without being caught earlier. This is something that has weighed heavily on my mind. Are we too confident in our legal system, overlooking small signs and warnings from society, especially when criminals don't always fit a recognizable pattern. The prolonged investigations involving both the FBI and APD and hundreds of calls from the public also highlight another issue: the importance of collaboration between law enforcement and the community in fighting crime. While investigators had to work under pressure, collecting evidence and following every trace, the involvement of the community, whether through crucial tips or simply reporting suspicious activities, accelerated the case-solving process. This is a lesson in the power of cooperation and paying attention to details that might otherwise be overlooked if we only focus on the bigger picture. Another noteworthy aspect is how each person in this story dealt with grief and loss. Mandy Primo, Trayvion's mother, was not only a grieving parent, but also a symbol of determination in the pursuit of justice. Her story clearly shows that love and responsibility can drive someone to overcome fear and doubt, seeking the truth no matter how difficult. Despite facing resistance from authorities and police, nothing could stop her from continuing her investigation. It was she who uncovered crucial information about Ritchie, which played a decisive role in bringing him to light. Mandy Primo's story reminds me that sometimes perseverance and family love can be more powerful than the legal system. This story truly serves as a wake-up call about the complexity of murder cases and how crimes are not always easily solved. It also serves as a reminder of the importance of confronting psychological, social, and legal issues in order to prevent murderers from continuing to spread fear and suffering in the community. And I cannot help but feel the contradiction between Ritchie's death and the safety of society. On one hand, Ritchie's death, though a result of a violent confrontation with the police, brought some peace to the community. On the other hand, it raises a significant question about how we handle crime, particularly in situations involving armed confrontations. It is unavoidable that the police had to fire to protect themselves and their colleagues in such a dangerous situation. However, Ritchie's death also made me think about a bigger issue. Have we been adequately prepared and compassionate enough to handle criminals who may have psychological issues or a traumatic past? Shootouts between the police and suspects, although justified in self-defense, still leave scars not only on those involved, but on the entire community, as they reflect a society that has failed to provide effective early intervention. In Ritchie's case, although he had committed numerous crimes and caused the deaths of innocent people, one cannot help but question his potential for reintegration if there had been earlier intervention from the mental health and legal systems. Ritchie might have been a victim of societal consequences, a person abandoned by the support systems, which led to his criminal behavior. This is a troubling issue because if we don't recognize the importance of crime prevention from the root causes, such cases will continue to happen. Another aspect that is worth pondering is how these cases have affected the community. For the families of the victims, the pain of loss is beyond words. Each death leaves an unhealable wound in the hearts of those left behind. However, the investigations also showcase the resilience of the community and the unity in the pursuit of justice. Tips from the public and the contributions of community members provided authorities with important leads, helping to shed light on the mysteries behind these crimes. This shows that when the community is properly encouraged and supported, it can be a powerful force in helping to protect the public's safety. However, this story also made me realize that while we can solve cases to some extent, the psychological and social consequences they create are always present. The loved ones of the victims, even if justice is served and the perpetrators punished, will continue to live with their grief and loss for the rest of their lives. Not to mention the tension and anxiety in the community when they are faced with an unapprehended murderer, leaving everyone feeling unsafe and constantly on edge. Looking at the bigger picture, this event again highlights the importance of investing in crime prevention measures, especially in supporting mental health and improving social education systems. When people are left behind, without attention from family, community, or society, they can fall into deep psychological trauma. Ritchie is a prime example of this. A person without family support and a broken social healthcare system can become a potential threat to the community. To prevent such tragedies in the future, society needs to reassess its strategies for prevention and early intervention. One more thing I cannot help but feel is the contradiction between seeking justice and punishment. While justice needs to be served, especially for severe crimes like murder, the conclusion of the case does not lessen the pain of the victims' families. In reality, justice is not just about bringing the criminal to court. It is also about helping those affected by the crime heal and continue their lives, despite losing their loved ones. Thus, this story also made me realize that justice must strike a balance between punishment and the healing of the community, so that everyone can rise above the grief and loss. So this case finally concluded with the death of James Dale Ritchie. After thoroughly researching the case, I feel a chill when thinking about each of the murders James committed. I hope that through this case, people will develop a wiser perspective on the type of latent criminality in society. Because any of us could encounter or even become a victim of these hidden criminals. Furthermore, women need to be more cautious, as they are often at a higher risk of becoming victims of such criminals. These criminals tend to target the vulnerable. After following this case, what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment to let us know. Thank you for your interest and follow-up. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on other crime case videos. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next videos. Everyone dreams of a peaceful life where each day passes by with warm moments spent with family. Images of gathering around for dinner, lively laughter, and tight hugs were once the reality of a family that we are about to learn about. Yet, that happiness is as fragile as morning dew, easily vanishing in the blink of an eye. A horrific event shattered that perfect picture, leaving a profound, haunting memory in the hearts of all. During my years living in Mississippi, I witnessed countless cases, but the murder of the young pregnant woman has always haunted me. The deeper I delved, the more I realized there were too many unusual details surrounding her death, especially the attitude of her fiancé. Could he be the one behind this crime, or was he just another victim? Mississippi, with its endless cotton fields and quaint wooden houses, always brings a sense of peace and serenity. However, behind that traditional beauty lies hidden corners filled with mystery. The murder case that occurred here revealed a far more complex reality than people might imagine. The contrast between the outward beauty and the hidden crimes within has made this case especially intriguing. Avis Marie Banks, born in 1979, was the second daughter of the Banks family in Vicksburg, a small riverside town in Mississippi. Their charming little home, with a front porch wide enough for a rocking chair, was always filled with laughter. Her father, Frederick, a straightforward man, worked as a sanitation worker, devoting his strength to keeping the city clean. Her mother, Deborah, with her nurturing heart, was the family's solid support and worked part-time as a babysitter for families in the neighborhood. The Banks family's life was a simple yet warm picture of love and connection. In September 1975, the cries of newborn Latata Banks brought comfort to the hearts of the Banks couple. Their happiness doubled when, 4 years later, Deborah was pregnant with Avis. Latata eagerly awaited her younger sister. Finally, in August 1979, Avis was born, a little angel with sparkling eyes. The family felt even more complete when 2 years later, Frina was born. The three Banks sisters grew up in the boundless love of their parents, sharing joys and sorrows together, creating beautiful childhood memories. Growing up together, the three Banks sisters became best friends. They shared everything, from little secrets to big dreams. Avis and Frina, the two younger sisters, had a particularly close bond. They grew up side by side, experiencing the unforgettable moments of youth together. As an older sister, Avis always protected and cared for Frina. Summer afternoons playing in the garden, late-night conversations, or simply watching movies together, all became beautiful memories etched in their minds. Avis was always an excellent student. When she brought home a report card full of A's, she couldn't hold back her tears. Avis's perfectionism made Frina feel pressured, quietly wondering if only getting B's was such a bad thing. But Avis, with her warm heart, was always ready to help her sister. She became a dedicated teacher, reading and guiding Frina bit by bit. Avis was not only talented, but also incredibly compassionate. She always prioritized others' well-being over her own, readily sharing and helping those around her. Avis always put others' needs before her own. She would often let Frina win games to make her feel happy and more confident. Avis cared deeply, not just for her sister, but also for her friends. She was willing to help anyone in need, whether it was a big or small matter. The entire Banks family were devoted members of Locust Grove Missionary Baptist Church. Every Sunday, they would go to church together to pray and seek peace. Avis's father, Fred, was a kind yet strict man. He always taught his daughters to become good women. As Latata grew up, Mr. Fred became a devoted protector for her, ensuring she was always safe and happy. The bond between Avis and her father, Frederick, was incredibly close. He often called her his little hero. Upon entering her high school years at Warren Central High School, Avis further solidified her passion for books. While her peers were captivated by parties, Avis found joy in reading. The sight of her sitting by her parents, her eyes fixed on a book, became an integral part of family life. It seemed that, for Avis, reading was not only a hobby, but also a way to explore the world and seek the meaning of life. Avis always had a special affection for children. She loved taking care of them, playing with them, and telling them stories. The dream of becoming a mother and working with children was always on her mind. When she graduated high school in 1997, she had already set a clear career path. Even though her older sister Latata had moved out, the bond among the sisters remained incredibly strong. Avis and Frina frequently visited their older sister and shared memorable moments together. Shopping trips and cozy dinners brought the three sisters closer than ever. That summer, as the first rays of June sunlight illuminated everything, the Banks family set off on their journey to Disney World. After many days of saving, the dream of stepping into the magical world finally became a reality. Mr. Fred, with his video camera always ready, recorded every memorable moment of the trip. Mrs. Deborah, the gentle mother, was always attentive to her children's comfort. Meanwhile, Avis and Frina were so excited that they couldn't sit still. Avis, a 17-year-old who was a bit shy, couldn't hide her excitement, while Frina, her 12-year-old sister, was lost in sweet dreams throughout the 730-mile journey. Laughter echoed throughout the park as the Banks family enjoyed the roller coaster together. Mr. Fred, with his ever-present video camera, captured every memorable moment of his daughters. Meanwhile, Avis, the oldest daughter, carefully documented these moments with her camera. Each photo held genuine emotions and the love she had for her family. Avis spent a lot of time organizing those photos into colorful albums as a way to preserve the family's beautiful memories. On Latata's big day, Fred couldn't hide his emotions. His eyes followed his eldest daughter's every step, his heart filled with happiness mixed with a touch of wistfulness. As he walked her down the aisle, he couldn't hold back his tears. His warm hand gave Latata a sense of absolute reassurance. Avis and Frina, her beautiful younger sisters, were also deeply moved. They shared their joy with their sister, creating a happy and warm family picture. After graduating from high school, Avis decided to attend Hines Community College in Vicksburg. On the day of her graduation, the entire family came to celebrate together. And of course, Fred, her ever-proud father, didn't forget to bring his trusty video camera to record every memorable moment of his daughter's day. From the moment Avis left the house until she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the camera lens was fixed on her. Frina still remembers how her dad was even more excited than Avis on that special day. He was so proud of his eldest daughter. This story is warm and reminiscent of the love that parents have for their children. Perhaps all of us have experienced similar moments or witnessed them with loved ones. After high school, Avis decided to pursue her dream at Alcorn State University in Jackson, Mississippi. The distance wasn't too far from her family, but enough to allow her to experience an independent life. There, Avis chose to study child development, a field she had always been passionate about. Her college years were a vibrant and transformative period in Avis's life. She had the chance to join various extracurricular activities, expand her network, and discover herself. Though introverted, Avis always tried to push her limits to adapt to her new environment. In 2001, Avis graduated with honors, becoming a source of pride for her family. Her bachelor's degree in child development was not just a diploma, but a testament to her relentless effort. With her degree in hand, Avis was ready to embark on a new chapter in her life. She dreamed of opening a child care center where children could develop holistically in a safe and loving environment. This idea wasn't just a job, but a mission Avis wanted to pursue. She wanted to create a welcoming space where parents could confidently entrust their children, especially those from underprivileged families. Avis dedicated a lot of time to planning this project, from building facilities to selecting a team of teachers. She believed that with determination and enthusiasm, her dream would certainly come true. Besides building her career, Avis also dreamed of a small, happy family. She yearned to find a life partner with whom she could build a home. Avis had specific standards for her future husband, someone with ambition, a shared passion, and similar values. However, she wasn't in a hurry, trusting that true love would come at the right time. Meanwhile, Avis focused on her career, taking a position as assistant director at a childcare center to gain the necessary experience and knowledge for her goal of opening her own center. She also planned to pursue a master's degree to further her expertise. In the spring of 2004, the crisp countryside air became warmer, with the lively laughter on the small sports field. Avis, 24, and her sister Ferdina were taking in the fresh air after a workout. Suddenly, a tall figure interrupted the peaceful scene. It was Keon Pittman. With a bright smile, he approached the sisters. Ferdina, straightforward by nature, felt somewhat wary. Her eyes darted around, as if looking for a reason to leave. Sensing her sister's caution, Avis smiled to reassure her. Keon, unfazed, struck up a conversation with Avis. He had a warm, deep voice and bright eyes that put others at ease. After a while, Keon asked if he could speak to Avis privately. From a distance, Ferdina watched the two with a look of suspicion. She knew her sister was kind-hearted, but was still afraid she might be deceived. Afterward, Avis decided to give Keon a chance to talk and get to know him. She walked over to where Keon was standing. He introduced himself as Keon Pittman from Vicksburg. He mentioned that he had studied at Alcorn State University and was 29 years old. He was currently a teacher and had previously taught at a public school in Tula, Louisiana, about a 30-minute drive from Vicksburg. Avis's eyes lit up when Keon shared his passion for sports and a healthy lifestyle. She realized they had more in common than she had thought. The conversation flowed naturally. From initial small talk, they gradually uncovered many interesting things about each other. Before saying goodbye, they exchanged phone numbers, promising to stay in touch. 10 minutes later, Avis returned to her sister Ferdina. Noticing her sister's curious look, Avis smiled and recounted the conversation. "I just got to know him, Ferdina. We talked about our shared interests and exchanged numbers to stay in touch." It wasn't hard for Frena to notice her sister's sparkly eyes when she mentioned Pittman. Clearly, Avis had been completely captivated by him. Their phone conversations afterward only strengthened their bond. Keon's warm, humorous voice brought Avis genuine moments of relaxation. They shared common interests, funny stories from daily life, and gradually, a special relationship blossomed. When Keon asked her out, Avis eagerly agreed. News of Avis's new relationship quickly spread among her friends. Although Keon didn't possess the typical handsome looks, his sincerity, humor, and attention to Avis had completely won her over. When Keon first met Avis, he was magnetically drawn to her vibrant appearance and healthy complexion. Her bright, sparkling eyes seemed to hold the sky, and her dimples appeared whenever she smiled, melting his heart. But what truly captivated Keon was her warm, pure soul. Avis was cheerful, sociable, and always knew how to bring laughter to everyone around her. Particularly, her boundless love for children deeply moved him. He likened her to a radiant sunflower, always facing the light and bringing warmth and joy to those around her. Mrs. Deborah had a good feeling when she met Keon. He not only had a pleasant appearance but also exuded the calm maturity of a grown man. Having graduated from college with a stable job and a disciplined lifestyle, Deborah was further impressed. Keon grew up in Pekin, a peaceful small town near New Orleans. Though life had taken him to many places, his love for his hometown remained strong. A graduate of Alcorn University with degrees in biology, physical education, and health sciences, Keon not only possessed solid knowledge, but also displayed a passion and versatility for life. Initially, Keon dreamed of becoming a doctor. However, after gaining a deeper understanding of the medical field, he realized that the job's pressures and the challenges of a medical career could significantly impact his mental health. After many sleepless nights, Keon decided to follow his heart and return to the path he was truly passionate about: teaching. Mr. and Mrs. Fred felt the warmth and sincerity in Keon from the first meeting. They recognized that he wasn't just a kind man but was also well-suited for Avis. Avis's happiness with Keon made them feel deeply content and joyful. Seeing their daughter glow whenever she mentioned Keon's name only strengthened their belief that they had found an ideal son-in-law. After a year of dating, Avis and Keon's love deepened. Deciding to build a home together was a significant milestone in their relationship. Mr. Fred and Mrs. Deborah were thrilled by the news. They could sense the happiness radiating from their daughter and future son-in-law. To have a more stable life, Keon decided to look for a new job. Opportunity knocked when he received an offer to teach 6th grade science at Chain Middle School in Jackson, Mississippi. This job not only offered a higher income but also gave him more time for family. Additionally, to satisfy his love for sports, Keon took on the role of coach for the school's boys' basketball team during the winter. Balancing both roles provided him a meaningful, well-rounded life. After a long search, Avis and Keon finally found their dream home in Ridgeland. Located in the peaceful suburbs of Jackson, Ridgeland offered a fresh, open living space, completely different from the hustle and bustle of the city. At the end of 2005, when Avis was 26 and Keon was 30, they officially moved into their new home at 708 Old Square Court in the Blackthorn neighborhood. This 3-bedroom house with a garage at the end of Lincolnshire Boulevard offered a sense of privacy and tranquility. The spacious green front yard was the perfect place for the two to enjoy relaxing afternoons together. With an affordable price and convenient location, the home at the Blackthorn was truly an ideal place for Avis and Keon to start a new chapter in life. Their new neighborhood was a vibrant community, gathering young families, newlyweds, and even older people who enjoyed a peaceful lifestyle. It was like a snapshot of life, with lively community activities and a friendly, warm atmosphere. Living here not only made it easier for Avis and Keon to blend into the community, but also provided a great foundation for building a happy family. The house's location was also convenient, with just a 25-minute drive to Keon's workplace. To increase their income, he decided to take up a bartending job at On the Border Mexican Cantina, a Mexican restaurant only about an 8-minute walk from the school. In the evenings after school, Keon was often at the restaurant, enthusiastically mixing delicious cocktails for customers. This job not only helped him improve the family's finances, but also offered him interesting experiences and the chance to meet new people. Avis felt incredibly happy to accompany Keon in preparing his classroom for the new school year at Chastain Middle. Every afternoon, she would come to school to help him arrange desks, decorate the classroom, and prepare the first lessons. Keon, with the enthusiasm of a dedicated teacher, was always excited to share his plans and hopes for his students with Avis. In conversations with his colleagues, Keon could not hide his pride when talking about Avis. He often described her as a beautiful, intelligent, and energetic woman. Keon's genuine compliments made everyone feel the deep love he had for Avis. Despite their busy work schedules and new life, the two always made time for each other, building a bright future together. As Ava steadily pursued her dreams, Keon was always by her side, supporting and encouraging her. The dream of owning a daycare center was always burning in Avis's heart. She spent a lot of time and dedication looking for a suitable space where she could create a second home for children. Her father even drove all the way from Vicksburg to help her visit and assess potential locations. Her family's enthusiastic support became a great motivation, strengthening her resolve to achieve her dream. However, after moving into her new home in 2005, the busy life made her put this plan on hold. To cover living expenses and gain experience, Avis took a full-time job at Bright Horizon, a daycare affiliated with Blue Cross Blue Shield. Although the job gave her valuable knowledge and skills, deep down, Avis still aspired to one day become her own boss. Avis was a dedicated and passionate caregiver. Every day at the daycare, she was full of energy and ready to take on new challenges. With meticulousness and care, Avis always completed her tasks well. She had a special love for infants and young children. On weekends, while other colleagues took breaks, Avis often volunteered to stay and look after and play with the kids. Avis's boss frequently gave her sincere praise. They valued her dedication, responsibility, and discipline. Moreover, Avis was loved by her colleagues for her friendliness, warmth, and team spirit. With her good communication skills and sensitivity, Avis knew how to create a cheerful and comfortable atmosphere for the children. For Avis, taking care of children was not just a job but a passion, and she wholeheartedly dedicated herself to bringing the best to the kids. Joy filled the air when the Johnny Coleman family moved next door. Soon after their arrival, Avis and Keon took the initiative to visit and warmly welcome their new neighbors. Their warmth and sincerity quickly bridged any gaps, creating a strong neighborly bond. Johnny once shared that Avis was a gentle, introverted person, yet very approachable. Busy with caring for their little one and their cozy home, Avis and Keon still made time to nurture relationships around them. They often tended their small garden together, cooked delicious meals, and enjoyed peaceful moments with their family. These seemingly simple acts clearly showed the love and appreciation they held for their current life. In August 2005, an unexpected joy arrived for Avis and Keon's small family. Avis was pregnant. Although they hadn't exactly planned to have a baby at that moment, Keon was overjoyed to receive the news. He knew it was a wonderful gift life had given them. Avis called her mother, Deborah, to share the surprise. Upon hearing the news of her sister's pregnancy, Friendina was thrilled and eagerly anticipated becoming an aunt. Joy spread throughout the family, bringing warmth and happiness. However, that happiness was soon overshadowed by pressures from the Banks family. Avis's pregnancy before marriage did not sit well with them. Rumors, scrutinizing glances, and requests for an early wedding created a tense family atmosphere. Avis and Keon felt the expectations and pressure from the family, particularly from Keon's parents. Eventually, Keon decided to propose to Avis and shared the news with his colleagues at school about his upcoming wedding. Everyone congratulated him on his fulfilling family life. By mid-January 2006, Avis's pregnancy had reached a stable phase, and she began to feel the physical changes more distinctly. Meanwhile, their life became busier than ever. Balancing work, household chores, and caring for both mother and child left both Avis and Keon feeling stressed. By August, as a basketball coach, Keon's schedule became even more intense. Long training sessions and demanding games required him to stay up late and wake up early. Additionally, his part-time bartending job demanded considerable time and energy. Although the constant hustle left him quite exhausted, Keon always strived to do his best for his little family. By November 2006, Avis's belly started to grow, revealing the soft curves of a mother-to-be. Her heart was filled with happiness, mixed with a bit of fatigue from her body's changes. Upon learning they were expecting a boy, Avis and Keon were thrilled. They spent a lot of time discussing names and finally chose a meaningful one for their son, Keln Avis. The name carried traditional resonance and expressed their love for their child. Excited to share the news with family and friends, Avis and Keon planned a trip back to Keon's hometown in Pekin and to visit Grandma Lotta in Houston for Thanksgiving. They looked forward to warm hugs, bright smiles, and blessings for their unborn child. Throughout the family gathering, Avis couldn't help but feel something was amiss with Keon. Unexpected phone calls, secret glances at the clock, and hurried exits from the room left her puzzled. Avis noticed that these calls tended to be lengthy and that Keon's tone sounded different when he spoke on the phone. This only increased her curiosity and concern. When Keon's father, Mr. Fred, asked about his son's frequent phone calls, Ava smiled and replied that it was likely due to the busy work demands at school and the bar, requiring Keon to often address unexpected issues. She tried to hide her suspicions to avoid worrying others. However, deep down, Avis felt something was not right, and she began to wonder if there was a secret Keon was hiding from her. At the end of November, Deborah and Fred drove to Ridgeland to help their daughter prepare for Christmas. The small home of Avis and Keon quickly filled with joyful laughter. With his skilled craftsmanship, Fred assisted Keon in setting up unique decorative lights. Ice cream cone-shaped lights hung from the roof, brightly illuminating candy canes placed on the porch. A homemade Christmas tree, adorned with thousands of twinkling lights, became the focal point of the small yard. Avis spent a great deal of time decorating the house with stockings over the fireplace, fresh wreaths, and shimmering ribbons. The family prepared a cozy Christmas dinner together. Avis invited her whole family to share in the festive season. They eagerly anticipated the moment they would all gather at the dinner table, exchange gifts, and share joyful stories. Afterward, they planned to attend Christmas Mass and enjoy the warm atmosphere of Christmas Eve. On Wednesday afternoon, November 29th, as the late-day sun bathed the streets in golden light, Avis left Bright Horizon. While driving home, her phone rang. It was Keon. His usual lively voice announced his basketball practice that evening and suggested meeting at Lakeland. Her fatigue after a long workday faded, replaced by a sense of excitement at the thought of seeing him. However, after hanging up, Avis sensed something was slightly off. She called Keon back to ask about their dinner plans. His voice sounded hurried as he replied that he would take care of everything. Avis agreed, though a hint of worry lingered. She wondered if her exhaustion was making her feel this way. With that thought, she decided to drive home, hoping that everything would be fine once she arrived. Her car slowly rolled down the narrow path leading home. Avis glanced at her small front garden where roses were beginning to bloom. When the car stopped in front of the house, she gently stepped out. Reaching for her keys, Avis opened the mailbox. The neatly arranged letters and newspapers inside brought her a sense of peace as she looked at her beloved home. Avis locked her car, holding her keys as she walked toward the garage. She pressed the button on the remote and the garage door slowly lifted. The car glided inside as the fluorescent light illuminated the dark space. Once certain the garage door was closed, Avis entered the house. The heavy wooden door closed behind her, marking the end of a long day. The streetlight cast a faint glow through the garage door, revealing a horrifying scene to Keon. Avis, the woman he loved, lay motionless on the cold concrete floor, a pool of blood spreading around her. She was still dressed in her work clothes, a light coat draped over her now lifeless body. She held her car keys tightly, as if she had struggled until the very end. Her wallet and scattered papers lay around, evidence of a fierce struggle. Keon rushed to Avis's side, his eyes frantic. He shook her body and called her name, but there was no response. A deep sorrow tore at his heart as tears streamed down his face. He held her close, kissed her pale lips, and pleaded for a miracle. But it was in vain. Avis was gone forever, leaving him in unimaginable pain. The dim garage light shone down on Avis's lifeless body, casting a horrifying sight. Her clothes were disheveled, revealing multiple wounds on her body. Keon's heart felt crushed as he knelt beside her, his trembling hand touching her cold cheek. With red-rimmed eyes, Keon hurried into the house. Each step shattered his heart further. The once peaceful home was now in chaos. Drawers had been upturned and papers scattered across the floor. Strange footprints marred the carpet, a harsh reminder of an intruder's presence. But what horrified Keon most was the hollow, chilling emptiness that filled the house. He ran back to Avis's side, clutching her cold body as hot tears streamed down his face, mixing with the rain outside the window. A haunting question filled his mind. Why? Why Avis? What had she done to deserve this? Instead of calmly calling the police, Keon, overwhelmed by grief and panic, acted on impulse. He ran out of the house, his legs barely under control, to the nearest neighbor's door. Pounding heavily on the door, he screamed hoarsely, his voice echoing down the street. A disheveled, pale-faced woman opened the door. Keon asked the neighbor to call 911 to report the incident involving Avis. The woman, in shock, quickly called the police to report the incident. The police arrived promptly at the scene. While waiting, Keon stood in front of the neighbor's house, his vacant eyes staring into the distance. The flashing police lights reflected his overwhelming grief. Keon knelt beside Avis, his eyes blankly fixed on her pale face. He remained there until the sound of police sirens broke the silence. At that moment, he felt as if his world was collapsing. Keon called the Banks family, urging them to come to his house immediately. They initially thought that something had happened to Avis, perhaps a miscarriage. But when the Banks family arrived, saw the police cars and the crime scene tape surrounding the house, they realized this was more than a miscarriage. Upon entering, they were devastated to learn Avis had been murdered, unable to believe the nightmare unfolding before them. Just days ago, Avis had sent an invitation for Christmas. They had planned a warm holiday, but now, all that remained were painful memories. Police sirens pierced the stillness of the night, casting red and blue lights over the cold concrete floor, illuminating the crime scene. Investigators quickly arrived, secured the area, and began their examination. Keon stood in the center of the scene, his vacant gaze fixed on Avis's lifeless body. With a trembling voice, Keon recounted what had happened. He spoke of his last phone call with Avis, their future plans, and their joy over expecting their first child. His voice cracked as he recalled the horrifying moment he discovered the crime. His story grew even more painful when he mentioned the unborn child, an innocent life lost alongside its mother. The flashlight beam swept across the dark room, casting flickering light on the blood-stained floor. Lieutenant Neal and Detective Frank Dillard stepped carefully into the crime scene. The scene before them made them shudder. Avis lay on the floor, cold and lifeless, her face contorted from fatal injuries. The forensic team found 4 gunshot wounds on her body, 2 in the chest and head, 1 through her leg, and the final shot had missed, leaving a dark hole in the garage door. In addition to the gunshot wounds, Avis's body bore several knife wounds on her face and neck. The cuts were sharp and precise, showing no signs of struggle, suggesting the killer acted ruthlessly and with determination. A particularly deep slash across her throat, nearly decapitating her, added to the horror of the case. Initial evidence suggested the killer had carefully planned the attack. The missed gunshot at the garage door indicated the shooter had a fixed position and aimed accurately. Furthermore, the use of both a gun and a knife implied a deep-seated hatred toward the victim. Another disturbing detail was the discovery that her underwear had been pulled down. This initially suggested a sexual motive. However, a forensic examination later confirmed that Avis was not sexually assaulted, raising the question of whether the killer staged the scene to mislead the police. During the crime scene examination, Detective Dillard found a strange footprint near where Avis's body was found. This footprint did not match any footwear in the house, suggesting a third party had entered the scene. Additionally, a forced entry mark on the back door indicated the killer had carefully planned the attack. Surprisingly, forensic scientists found no fingerprints or DNA from the killer at the scene. The absence of biological evidence made the case increasingly difficult to solve. The back door had been forced open so hard that the handle left an impression on the plaster wall, hinting at a violent break-in. Lieutenant Neal scrutinized the mark, wondering if the killer had left it as a taunt. Avis's blood was splattered on the wall, separating the garage from the house, forming a dark red smear. The bloodstain's location, near the light switch, suggested that Avis may have tried to turn on the light for help before being attacked. Throughout the interrogation, Keon left a profound impression with his unusual demeanor. Instead of showing sorrow and grief over losing his fiancée and unborn child, he appeared oddly calm and even displayed smirks and indifference. The contrast between his composed exterior and the tragedy he had just experienced deepened Detective Dillard's suspicion of his testimony's reliability. Inside the house, the police encountered a miniature battlefield. Everything was systematically ransacked and belongings lay scattered. Strangely, expensive jewelry and other valuables remained untouched in their usual spots. As the investigators examined further, they found more oddities. Electrical cords had been carefully unplugged and neatly rearranged, not typical behavior for a thief. It became increasingly clear to the investigators that this case was far more complex than they initially thought. Lieutenant Neal frowned, his gaze sweeping over every detail of the chaotic room. The deeper he investigated, the stronger his sense that something was off. Was this simply a case of murder during a robbery, or was there a more complex scheme lurking beneath? Despite the clear appearance of the evidence, there were contradictions difficult to explain. It felt as though an invisible hand was deliberately concealing the truth, leading the investigation into a dead end. All efforts to trace the intruder were in vain. Even the sniffer dog, with its keen sense of smell, found no unusual scents at the scene. This reinforced the police's suspicions of Keon's involvement. His unconvincing testimony and unusual demeanor only fueled the investigators' doubts. Could Keon be the one responsible for Avis's death, attempting to cover his tracks by staging a fake crime scene? Faced with mounting inconsistencies and Keon's strange behavior, the police decided to bring him in for a more thorough interrogation. During the second questioning, Keon adamantly maintained his innocence, mechanically recounting events. However, the investigators noticed distinct differences in his eyes and tone compared to his previous interview. His frequent calls and messages right before heading to the police station only heightened suspicions. Keon's cold indifference toward the death of his fiancée and their unborn child made him the focus of the investigation. A neighbor's testimony provided a crucial lead. On the day of the incident, Keon exhibited unusual behavior when he came home. Instead of parking directly outside as usual, he chose to park at a distance and walk to the garage first, rather than the front door. This sudden change in routine raised further suspicions about Keon's actions. Was he deliberately hiding something? During the investigation, police uncovered Keon's complex extramarital relationships. His phone contained messages and calls to a specific woman, Brenda Martin. Brenda, a 30-year-old parent of one of Keon's students, had met him during class drop-offs. When questioned, Brenda stated that their relationship had only been flirtatious with no deeper connection. However, the police were suspicious, wondering if Keon, reluctant to marry and caught in infidelity, had plotted to eliminate Avis to be with Brenda. But Brenda had a solid alibi, ruling her out as an accomplice, further intensifying the mystery around Keon's true motives. When examining Keon's call history, police found a few suspicious calls beyond his cryptic interactions with Brenda on the day of the incident. The call log showed no record of a 911 call, obviously because the neighbor made that call. When asked why he didn't contact the police himself, Keon explained that he had bought his phone in another state and was worried it wouldn't connect to the nearest local police. But clearly, that's not how 911 works, is it? It seemed like a cover for other strange calls he made that day to someone else. In his call history, police found a name unfamiliar to them but known to Keon, Carla Hughes. When asked why he contacted Carla that afternoon before heading home, Keon said he had taught at Chastain High School during the day, ran a few errands afterward, and grabbed some groceries, though he didn't take them to his home with Avis. Since he didn't have time to drop them off and then return to school, he left them at Carla's apartment, which was closer to Chastain. Keon told police he went to basketball practice, which ended around 7:30 p.m., picked up the groceries from Carla's place, and then went home. That was when he discovered Avis's body. As you can imagine, this interview did little to convince police of Keon's innocence. They labeled him a person of interest. However, after testing Keon for gunpowder residue and seizing blood-stained clothes and shoes, they released him without pressing charges. While awaiting lab results on Keon's clothes, police continued their investigation. They visited a Mexican restaurant where he worked part-time as a bartender. There, they spoke to his co-workers, who had plenty to share. Keon was known as a notorious flirt, openly enjoying female attention. According to his restaurant colleagues, he had cheated on Avis with multiple women who would visit the bar, order drinks, flirt, and sometimes even kiss him. One of the recent women was none other than Carla Hughes, who frequently visited on nights Keon worked and was also his colleague at the school. Teachers often went out together, dining at nearby restaurants, but Carla would see Keon outside of work gatherings. While no one outright claimed they were more than friends, they did note Carla's regular visits over the past few months. Investigators now heard Carla's name twice, once when Keon left groceries at her apartment and again from his restaurant co-workers. It was time for the police to have a conversation with Carla. On December 1st, 2 days after Avis's murder, Detective Dillard visited Chastain High School to interview Keon's colleagues, particularly Carla Hughes. When he asked to speak with her, she burst into uncontrollable tears, raising suspicions. Detective Dillard asked if she knew Avis and if that was why she was upset. Carla admitted she knew of Avis, but didn't know her personally, explaining she was distraught about what Keon was going through, which she found terribly upsetting. Dillard couldn't conduct a proper interview as Carla was too emotional, so he scheduled a private interview with her for later that evening after her shift. Afterward, he inquired about Keon and Carla around the school. While Keon's reputation was known, here's what they learned about Carla. Carla, a 25-year-old cheerleading instructor from Greenville, Mississippi, was born on June 12, 1981. At 6 weeks old, she was adopted by her Uncle Carl and Aunt Linda Hughes, her mother's first cousins. Carla attended T.L. Weston High School and regularly went to Mercy Seat Baptist Church. Her parents were teachers and close friends of prominent town figures, including the pastor and the mayor. Carla participated in numerous activities: tennis, soccer, basketball, band, dance, cheerleading, the Key Club, the Mayor's Youth Council, and the Mississippi State Senate, among others. Carla excelled in equestrian and beauty competitions, winning numerous awards and graduating with honors. Her high school class even voted her most likely to succeed. As a cheerleader, Carla brought enthusiasm to every game, displaying her vibrant personality. She was also a talented musician who played in the school band. Carla's involvement extended beyond school activities. She eagerly participated in community events, always looking for opportunities to make a positive impact. Her lively personality and natural charisma endeared her to everyone around her. She was loved by classmates and teachers alike. After high school, Carla attended the University of Southern Mississippi, where she completed a bachelor's degree in education in 2000. During that time, Carla was in a long-term relationship with a man. She and the man were engaged, but he left her and their unborn child just days before their wedding. Not long after, Carla gave birth to a baby boy. She then attended Belhaven College in Jackson, Mississippi, to earn a master's degree in education, and subsequently started taking postgraduate courses in education at Delta State University while working at an elementary school in Greenville. Later, she decided to take a position as a 7th grade language arts teacher at Chastain Middle School in August, just before the school year started. She also served as the cheerleading coach and enjoyed making new friends with other teachers, including Keon. Everyone detectives spoke to said they loved Carla. She was very popular with her students as well as her colleagues. They noted her close relationships with staff and students, including Coach Keon Pittman. They often chatted outside the office, called each other, and hung out after school. When asked if they thought Keon and Carla were more than friends, no one could say for certain but wouldn't be surprised if it were true. However, when Detective Frank Dillard asked Carla directly if she was involved with Keon, she denied it. That evening, Carla and Detective Dillard had an 80-minute interview at the police station. During the interview, Carla presented herself as charming, friendly, and helpful. The detectives asked her to recount what she had done on the day Avis was killed. She told them that she had seen Keon when both were dismissing students at the end of the school day. He mentioned that he was going grocery shopping and asked if he could leave his groceries at her place while he went to basketball practice. She said yes, that would be fine, and that's what he did. Keon picked up groceries after school from Rainbow Whole Foods and brought them over at 4:40 p.m. Carla's apartment was between Rainbow Whole Foods and Chastain Middle School, making it a quick, natural stop between errands and basketball practice. She said Keon dropped off the groceries, went to practice, and she went to the gym for her workout. Later, Keon called her during practice to ask when he could come back to pick them up, and she told him she was on her way home to shower, but he could come by any time. Keon finished basketball practice at 7:30. Man stopped by her apartment for the groceries around 7:50. Carla said they chatted for a few minutes, then she started getting ready for bed and called her mother. That was when Keon left to drive home. They asked her when she next heard from him, although they already knew the answer from Keon's phone records. She told detectives Keon had called her around 8:45 p.m. She was on the phone with her mother then and held the line with her to answer his call. She assumed he would say, "Hey, I made it home," and wish her good night, but instead, he was yelling. He was saying, oh my God," repeatedly, telling her she needed to get to his house as fast as possible because someone had hurt Avis. Carla said Keon described the scene to her, saying it looked like their house had been robbed, furniture was everywhere. Avis was lying unconscious next to her car, in a pool of blood under her head, and there were papers scattered all around her body. Carla was overwhelmed and confused. She called her mother back and relayed everything. Carla asked her mother if she should go to help Keon, and her mother advised her, "No, don't go over there. That's a crime scene." So Carla chose not to drive over and assist Keon, even though he called her several more times throughout the evening, while he was in a police car and later at the station. Detectives found this suspicious, especially since Keon hadn't called 911 but instead contacted another woman. They asked Carla if Keon frequently called her after work, and she said yes, they stayed in touch. It made sense, as both were coaches, so their schedules aligned with basketball, cheerleading, and school events. However, detectives still wanted to understand the nature of these calls, but Carla insisted they were innocent. In fact, Keon had even spoken to Carla in Avis's presence. For instance, when Keon, Carla, and their colleagues went out after hours, Keon would call Avis and name everyone there, including Carla. She stated Avis knew her as one of Keon's friends and colleagues. Dillard asked Carla if she had a boyfriend, and she said no, her last relationship had ended. Then he asked if she and Keon had a romantic relationship, and she said no, they did not. He was not her boyfriend, he was just a friend. There was nothing sexual between them. But when Dillard pressed her further, she eventually admitted they had had sex. However, it was nothing more than a close friendship, it wasn't serious. She called it a special friendship and said that sometimes they showed affection publicly, but never went beyond kissing, except for sex. Carla told the police she respected the fact that Keon was engaged and wanted nothing more than a casual date. She never told him to leave Avis and said she respected Avis even though she didn't know her well. Carla had even kept her motorcycle at Keon's house for a while, and Avis hadn't had a problem with it. Detective Dillard found her story reasonable as it matched everything Keon had told them, but Carla's casual attitude about everything seemed odd. During the interview, Carla received a phone call and answered it calmly before returning to the interview. Initially, she had cried a lot over Avis's death, but now she was calm. Dillard wasn't sure what to think. Carla also stated that she was working out at the time of Avis's death, but that wasn't the best alibi unless there were gym cameras or someone had seen her. Everyone was a suspect, and Carla and Keon providing alibis for each other raised suspicions that both might be involved. Dillard asked Carla if she owned a gun, and she said no. He then asked if she had access to one, and she said no, but her father had many guns because he was a hunter. Finally, Dillard asked Carla what she thought about Avis and her child's death, to which Carla replied that it was very, very unfortunate. After these interviews, both Keon and Carla were considered suspicious by police investigating Avis's case. Detectives even wondered if Keon and Carla had conspired to kill Avis. As they searched for more clues, they began seriously looking for the murder weapon, a gun and a knife. Although they had no leads on the knife, police were able to narrow down the type of gun used by the killer based on the crime scene. They knew they were looking for a 5-shot revolver. 4 shots had been fired into Avis, with .38 caliber bullets later recovered from her body, and 1 stray shot had gone through the garage door. So the shooter had emptied the gun. The shooter also took the time to pick up the casings from the ground. Additionally, a size 8 male shoe print was found at the crime scene. They searched Keon's belongings at his home, but found no shoes matching the footprint left at the back door. However, they knew the shoe size matched. Could Keon have disposed of them? Fortuitously for the police, a man reached out regarding Avis's case. His name was Patrick Nash, and he was Carla Hughes's cousin. Patrick told the police that Carla had recently borrowed a gun from his personal collection. She wanted it for protection. Her neighborhood was known to be unsafe. Her apartment had been broken into several times since she moved in. Once, her father even had to drive from Greenville to fix her door lock. So Carla told Patrick that she didn't feel safe and would feel more secure if she could defend herself if the same thing happened again. So 3 days before Avis was killed, on Sunday, November 26th, Patrick gave Carla a .38 caliber 5-shot revolver, as well as a 3-inch hunting knife. When Patrick handed the gun to Carla, it was loaded. But when Carla returned the gun on December 1st, 2 days after Avis's murder, it was empty, and Carla hadn't returned the knife. Why did Patrick trust his cousin with such dangerous weapons so easily? Let's rewind a bit. When Carla first moved to Jackson for her teaching job at Chastain in early August, her parents were thrilled to help. They took care of her son while she found a place to live in Jackson, which gave her time to consider several apartments. But because Carla couldn't be too picky in her new accommodations on such short notice, she unwittingly rented an apartment in a rough neighborhood. Her parents were quite concerned when they visited and felt the area was unsafe for a woman to live alone. Their concerns proved valid. In early October, just 3 months after Carla moved in, someone tried to break into her apartment. The intruder didn't succeed, but Carla was still scared. However, she didn't move out and continued living there, citing a lack of time to find a new place. Patrick, too, knew about the incident, so he believed her and lent her the weapons. He didn't think much of it at the time, but on the evening of December 1st, shortly after Carla left her interview with Detective Dillard, she returned to Patrick's house and returned the revolver. It was freshly cleaned, and the bullets were no longer inside. When Patrick asked Carla where they were, she said she had used them for target practice. Remember that exactly 5 bullets were fired at the crime scene, and he never saw that knife again. Patrick knew Avis was dead because Carla had told him. On the night Avis was murdered, she called him to let him know, so all the details lined up. Patrick really didn't know what to do. He had thought about it for a few days. He cared deeply for Carla and saw her as a truly compassionate and gentle person. He just didn't think she was capable of such violence, capable of murder. Did she know the bullets had been used? Had she cleaned the gun, or did someone else use it without telling her? They didn't know. But what they did know was that they needed to report and turn the gun over to the police. The police were very grateful that they had come forward. So Carla had lied to the police twice. Although she claimed her relationship with Keon was only sexual, was she being truthful? Was she more enamored with Keon than she let on? Did she want Avis dead? As the police delved deeper into Carla's background, they grew increasingly suspicious of her motives. They knew they couldn't trust Carla, especially when she had lied to them about the nature of her relationship with Keon, saying it wasn't romantic when it clearly was. They had been intimate, and they hadn't really made an effort to hide it. The two lovers had certainly become entangled in their infatuation. 3 times, Keon and Carla waited until Avis was out of the house to have sex at Avis's place. And that wasn't the only time Keon and Carla risked exposing their affair. They had even been caught kissing in the school bathroom. Not only that, but they called and texted each other nearly every day. According to colleagues of both, Carla even told them he was her future husband. Remember, Carla was fully aware that Keon was engaged to another woman, but for some reason that didn't seem to bother her. I don't blame Carla 100% for this. You never know what Keon told her about his relationship with Avis. Meanwhile, Avis had no idea about Keon and Carla's relationship. She thought Carla was just one of Keon's many colleagues. Avis and Carla had only met once or twice. Occasionally, Keon talked on the phone with Carla in Avis's presence, but from what I can tell, Avis never witnessed anything between Keon and Carla that made her suspicious. And if you find yourself judging Avis a bit and thinking, how could she not know? I would encourage you to stop. Avis loved Keon. He was her fiancé and the father of her child. She trusted him, and you'd be surprised at what you can accomplish when someone trusts you. Back to the police investigation, she not only lied about her relationship with Keon, she also lied about having access to a gun. During her second police interrogation, Carla admitted to her romantic relationship with Keon, but she also told the police that she did not own a gun. When they asked Carla again if she had access to a gun, she said no, definitely not. She even went on to explain that her father had many guns, but she did not. Surely this was yet another serious lie of hers. At this point, the police could not trust anything she said. They began to suspect whether she had been jealous of Avis as she and Keon were preparing to marry, and that she might have been left behind by Keon. Or perhaps both Keon and Carla had planned to kill Avis. Keon was a womanizer, and he might not have wanted to marry Avis, so he could also have a motive. But the results of the investigators gave the police a clear answer. As I mentioned earlier, before Keon was released after his statement to the police, they took photographs and collected blood and gunshot residue samples from his clothes. The investigators collected samples and conducted gunshot residue GSR tests, which came back positive, although only one particle was found on each hand. This residue could have come from Avis when Keon was holding her, which could also explain the blood on his clothes. Additionally, the investigators sent the revolver to a ballistics company, where they conducted several test firings. They determined that the bullets used in the revolver matched those used to kill Avis. Since Carla owned that gun on November 29th, it was confirmed that she was somehow involved in this crime and actively working to cover it up. On the morning of December 6th, the funeral for Avis and her unborn son, Ken, was held at the Locust Grove Church. It was a day filled with sorrow and grief. The funeral took place on the very day Avis was supposed to receive her master's degree. It was a bitter irony that she couldn't be there to celebrate her academic achievement. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to pay their respects and say goodbye to the woman who had touched so many lives. As people gathered around reminiscing about Avis's life, Keon walked in. You could feel the tension. Avis's family had just learned of his affair with Carla Hughes, and emotions were running high. But the police were present in case anything happened. Fred and Deborah were very angry that Keon even showed up at the funeral. They remembered Thanksgiving weekend when Keon spent all his time pacing and talking on the phone. They wondered if this had anything to do with Avis's death. Avis's sister suspected something about her sister's death seemed brutal and calculated to the extent that she thought there was more to it. Regardless, they felt that Keon had some role in Avis's murder, and the family was very angry that he had the gall to show up and not even cry. They saw him pretending to be sad, and they didn't want him there. Fred and Deborah described what he was doing as just shouting. No tears flowed from his eyes. It was just noise. Some men then began to attack Keon. The police had to intervene and escort him to his car, with some sort of cloth or jacket covering his face from view, and he never saw the Banks family again. That would be difficult. On one hand, he was the fiancé of your loved one and the father of their unborn child. But on the other hand, he was a suspect. So I don't know what I would do, but I think I would lean toward not wanting him there. Even if he was just cheating on my relative while they were pregnant with his child, that would probably be enough for me to not want to see him again. For his lack of respect, Avis certainly didn't deserve such a level of disrespect and drama at her funeral. After the funeral and crucial testimony from Patrick Nash, Carla Hughes was called in for another interview, and this time she brought a lawyer. The man she brought was Johnny Walls, a well-known state senator who knew the Hughes family very well from when they were in Greenville. He had known Carla Ann Hughes since she was a little girl. Johnny met Carla when she was still in high school, and he held her in high regard. Remember, Carla had been very successful. I've told you about all her honors as she grew up, so he was very shocked to learn she would be involved in a crime of this magnitude. There weren't many questions she was willing to answer, but at one point, when the detectives left the room, she and her lawyer continued to talk. They should have known better, as most of us know that all police stations record and sometimes video record in their interview rooms. They sat there, whispering to each other, and her lawyer said something. In this interrogation, the police directly accused Carla of murder, hoping she would be honest and tell them what she knew about the man she seemed to be covering for, but she remained silent. Given that Carla was always well-liked and successful in life, her arrest was a huge shock to her community. Everyone thought she had good standing and was just a really good person. She never even became agitated or raised her voice. Sometimes she was stubborn, but many of us can be like that, so all of this was hard for people to grasp. Keon also had no prior criminal record. Investigators needed to determine who between the two of them was the actual perpetrator. When the police presented Carla with documents charging her as an accessory to murder, the detectives once again left the room. She and her lawyer discussed the situation. Her lawyer told Carla not to worry too much. The police were sure Keon was the culprit. They just needed a charge, and Carla would be the best person to blame Keon. He told her the reason she was being charged was that Patrick had sworn an affidavit stating that Carla had returned the empty gun to him and that she had cried when handing it back. Carla stated she did not cry and that she did not know who killed Avis because she was not there to witness it. She stood firm. She would not implicate Keon in any crime. Johnny wanted to know why Carla was trying to protect Keon. For the police and others trying to understand this crime, it made no sense. Why wasn't she trying to save herself? The police could only speculate. They wondered, was Carla in love with Keon? Is that why she refused to point the finger? And if Carla really didn't know what had happened and someone else killed Avis, was she just being honest and trying to be true to herself? She certainly wouldn't plead guilty when the police had so little evidence against her. Together, Carla and Johnny agreed that she wouldn't plead guilty and would remain silent. And because she stayed silent, it only reinforced her charges. She was taken to the Madison County Detention Center and resigned from Chastain High School. On that same day, December 6th, Lieutenant Neal submitted a search warrant for Carla's residence. And those things take a few days to complete, but eventually everything was ready. Detective Dillard even recorded a video during the search of Carla's apartment. They hoped to find a few different things: the missing bullet casings, a missing folding knife, blood-stained clothing, shoes matching the shoe prints at the door, gloves, or any correspondence between Carla and Keon that might shed light on their relationship. The search was indeed fruitful, as the police uncovered several new clues. First, they found a photo of Keon on Carla's nightstand, along with a series of other photos she had of him. This further confirmed their relationship. Second, a handwritten poem addressed to Carla was signed with the initials KP. They knew that was the abbreviation for Keon Pittman. Third, while searching Carla's closet, they found hundreds of pairs of shoes still in their boxes. You can see them right here. But there was one standout pair: size 10 black tread-safe tennis shoes for women. These are non-slip shoes that someone would typically wear to work if they were serving at a waiting table or something similar. The police sent the shoes to the Mississippi Crime Lab, and the tread pattern, you can even look at it, matched exactly with the shoe print found on the back door of Avis. Here's something interesting. A women's size 10 is equivalent to a men's size 8, so these shoes were the exact size they were looking for. They were quickly sent to the lab for DNA testing. The initial test did not detect any DNA on the shoes. However, the detectives decided to send the shoes to a second lab for more in-depth analysis. There, a technician carefully examined them under a microscope. They were astounded to find several minuscule bloodstains on that shoe. The technician conducted DNA testing on the dried bloodstains, and the final results showed that the blood found on the shoe matched Avis Banks. This evidence indicated that Carla had been in contact with Avis at some point during her murder. On December 8, 2006, police charged Carla Hughes with 2 counts of murder, one for Avis Banks and one for her unborn child. In the state of Mississippi, A 5-month-old fetus is considered a human being in murder cases. Carla was held without bail at the Madison County Detention Center. Once again, the police did not believe Carla had committed this crime on her own. They hoped these charges would encourage Carla to turn on Keon. The police even told Carla's lawyer as much. However, Carla would not implicate Keon. She remained silent. In the following days, news outlets continuously asked Lieutenant Neal why Carla was being charged, but he did not reveal any information to the press. Instead, he continued to pursue Keon. His car was now missing, and he had never returned to school or told anyone whether he would come back. The kids at school were very confused about what had happened to their favorite science and language arts teacher. It was like a huge hole in their community. A slew of articles kept repeating the same things, that the police could not comment on Avis's case until Keon was interviewed. Deborah and Fred felt relieved that someone was being charged. Deborah told the Clarion Ledger on December 7th that she had indeed met Carla before. Carla had attended one of Avis's housewarming parties, and she had come to visit as Keon's friend. During this time, the police also continued their investigation to find more evidence for the trial or to provide any information to the press. They wanted to ensure that the trial proceeded without missing any perpetrator in the case. While the investigation continued, they continued gathering more evidence from Carla. When examining Carla's phone records and call history on the day of the incident, the police found additional evidence to firmly establish that Carla was not the only one involved in the case. When extracting phone wave location data from Carla's phone on the day of the incident, the provider reported that she had made 2 outgoing calls, one before the incident occurred and one after it happened. Both calls were to Keon Pittman and were signaled from a location close to the crime scene. It was clear the police knew that Keon could very well have had prior knowledge of the impending incident, but they had no specific evidence to charge him as an accomplice if Carla wouldn't testify against him in court. All hopes were now pinned on Carla Hughes's trial. A month later, in January 2007, the month that Avis and Keon were preparing to get married, Keon moved away. In February 2007, Keon sold his home in Richland and Avis and moved to Michigan. At that point, he also stopped communicating with his lawyer, and the police gave up trying to contact him. Meanwhile, in July 2007, Carla was officially indicted, and in October 2009, Carla Hughes's trial, now 28 years old, began. However, subsequent trial sessions were delayed many times for various reasons. Less than a year after the death of his former fiancée, in December 2007, Keon married another woman from Detroit. When the police discovered that Keon had married, they obtained a copy of his marriage license and presented it to Carla on Valentine's Day in 2008. The police wanted to see if she would say anything, but Carla didn't take the bait. She stated she was not surprised he had married and continued to remain silent about whether Keon was an accomplice. A few reasons contributed to this trial dragging on for so long, including Ridgeland changing district attorneys in the middle of Carla's proceedings, which I imagine slowed things down, and then Lieutenant Neal needed surgery after falling from a 15-foot ladder. But on Monday, October 5th, 2009, the long wait finally ended. Carla's trial began. The DA was anticipating a death penalty due to the especially heinous nature of Avis's murder, and her family had publicly supported that decision. At the trial, the prosecution argued that Carla killed Avis out of jealousy. She wanted Avis out of the picture so she could be with Keon. They contended that Carla and Keon's relationship was not merely sexual, as Carla had previously claimed to the police. In fact, the prosecution believed the opposite was true. Carla was madly in love with Keon, but he did not feel the same way about her. Keon, who testified for the prosecution, agreed with this assessment of their relationship. Keon told the court that Carla was very angry because he would not leave Avis for her. According to Keon, he and Carla had once been worried about a potential pregnancy. When Carla thought she was pregnant, she actually pressured Keon to leave Avis, but he refused. Keon's refusal to choose Carla was said to have angered her so much that she began driving to Keon and Avis's home. If Keon didn't tell Avis about their affair, Carla would do it herself. Keon testified that the only thing stopping Carla from revealing their relationship was his threat to call the police on her, alleging she was stalking the couple. However, he did not end things with Carla, which might have eased the situation. Keon also testified that there were other times Carla felt frustrated with his commitment to Avis. For example, a week before Avis was murdered, Keon and Avis visited family in Picayune, Mississippi, for Thanksgiving. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, Keon met Carla at a hotel in Picayune. According to Keon, Carla begged him to stay at the hotel with her longer, but he couldn't stay too late because he was in town to see family. Carla was said to be upset about this, and their date ended on a sour note. The next day, Carla told Keon, "From this point on, some things will change." She then borrowed a gun and hunting knife from her cousin, and 4 days later, Avis was murdered. The prosecution argued that Carla had completely lost her mind. They hinted that perhaps Carla's previous failed engagement, when her fiancé and the father of her child left her just days before their wedding, made Keon's consistent rejection particularly painful. Keon Pittman testified and gave evidence in court for 4 hours. Throughout his testimony, he insisted on his innocence. He called himself a fool for sleeping with Carla. Avis knew they were friends, but did not know they were dating. She trusted Keon and never thought he was cheating. Keon felt guilty that Avis worked, came home, and dedicated her life to their family while he was putting her in danger by pursuing another woman. He felt he bore some responsibility for what happened. At least he could admit his wrongdoing and recognize where he went wrong. Keon painted himself as genuinely feeling guilty for cheating on Carla. But remember, fundamentally, he was still trying to blame Carla and save himself from being implicated and sent to prison. In addition to Keon's testimony, the prosecution also had solid physical evidence pointing to Carla as the perpetrator of the crime. The evidence presented included the gun provided by Patrick, the shoe sample collected during the search of Carla's home, blood on the shoe belonging to Avis, and cell phone data from Carla's phone near the time and location of the crime. The gun was also tested for ballistics, and experts concluded that it matched the bullet wounds that Avis sustained. The prosecution also pointed out that Carla had been to the couple's home several times before, while Avis was away, so she was very familiar with the layout and decor of the house. Therefore, it would have been easy for Carla to break in, and she might have known in advance how Avis would enter the house to hide and strike easily. All the evidence now pointed to Carla. Clearly, they also wanted to pressure Carla to name Keon, but it seemed that was not enough. Carla's defense attorney, Johnny Walls, claimed that Keon had set Carla up and that he was solely responsible for the deaths of Avis and her unborn child. However, his client might not want to name Keon Pittman. The attorney also pointed out that finding the shoes in her apartment was illogical if Carla were the actual perpetrator. Why would she keep such crucial evidence in her home? Walls argued that Keon had a key to Carla's apartment and could have committed the crime and intentionally left the shoes in Carla's home to blame her. Carla had actually gifted those shoes to Keon. They were very good non-slip shoes for bartending. However, when he brought them to a Mexican restaurant, Keon said the restaurant told him he couldn't wear those specific shoes, so he returned both the shoes and the apartment key to her in mid-November. But the prosecution countered this theory with other investigative results. Around 5:30 to 6 p.m. on the day of the crime, call data showed Keon was still at school. If Keon was indeed the shooter, he couldn't have been at the scene in such a short time. Additionally, the blood and gunshot residue on Keon were determined by experts to have come from him touching Avis's body. If he were the shooter, his clothing and shoes should have shown high-velocity blood splatter, but there were no such traces. However, based on the call history between the two before and after Avis was murdered, I believe Keon may have been involved to some degree in the crime, such as plotting it. According to the attorney, due to his infidelity, Keon did not want to marry and planned to kill his fiancée. Keon was accused of wearing Carla's shoes while committing the crime to frame her, thereby eliminating both women. I believe the prosecution also wanted to believe this, But in reality, the evidence to charge Keon was too weak for them to do anything else. The court works based on evidence. They cannot draw conclusions based on personal opinions or emotions. And by now, you must have your own speculations, right? On October 12th, the jury began deliberating. They asked if Carla could testify, but she remained silent. After 8 hours of deliberation, Carla was found guilty. When the verdict was read, Deborah became very sad. She even fainted and needed to be revived in a private room. Linda, Carla's mother, with all intent and purpose, went to see her and prayed with her. Both families suffered losses in this tragic crime. Both families mourned. After 3 long years of seeking justice for Avis's murder, the Banks and Hughes families were completely exhausted. After spending so long together, they connected over such a horrific event. They wanted the best for each other and wanted all of this to end. Carla's sentencing was scheduled for Wednesday, the 14th. Her son was now 5 years old. If Carla was sentenced to death, her child would have to live with that pain for life. The jury subsequently agreed to sentence Carla to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole instead of death. She was transferred to the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility, where she would spend the rest of her life reflecting on her crime. She later continued to appeal her sentence. However, all of Carla's appeals were denied by the appellate court in 2012. I guess we will never know whether Keon had any role in Avis's murder. Sometimes there are frustrating cases like this. I still have many questions about this case, such as what Keon and Carla said to each other on the phone during the more than 5 times they called each other that night. Was it just a way for Carla to pretend that nothing inappropriate was happening? If Keon was an accomplice in Avis's murder, he would have to pay for it with feelings of guilt and shame for the rest of his life. And if Keon truly did not know what happened to his fiancée and unborn child, then my heart goes out to him. Losing a loved one when you have all these plans and your whole life ahead is incredibly cruel and hard to come back from. Alright, the case is basically coming to an end. But before we really wrap up this video, I want you to take another look at the case to see if it offers any lessons for each of us. First, let's revisit the 3 main characters in this case. Avis Banks, who represents the innocent victim in this tragic narrative, was a loving partner and devoted mother-to-be, with dreams and plans for her future. Her life was taken too soon due to circumstances beyond her control. It's heartbreaking to think about the potential she had and the family she wanted to build. Avis serves as a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing our loved ones. As for Keon, he is a complex character caught in a web of his own making. His choices led to devastating consequences for both Avis and Carla. While he may not have intended for things to unfold as they did, his lack of honesty and commitment played a significant role in the tragedy. Keon's journey reflects the inner turmoil that comes with guilt and the heavy burden of responsibility. He must grapple with the pain of loss while questioning his own role in it. Finally, we have Carla Hughes. Carla's story is one of desperation and jealousy. Her love for Keon transformed into a dark obsession, leading her to take actions that changed multiple lives forever. While it's essential to understand the emotional turmoil she faced, it's equally important to recognize that her choices were ultimately hers to make. Carla's situation teaches us about the dangers of allowing negative emotions to dictate our actions and the importance of seeking help before it's too late. The tragic case of Avis Banks teaches us several important lessons about love, betrayal, and the complexities of human relationships. First and foremost, it reminds us of the consequences of jealousy and unresolved feelings. Carla's intense emotions led her to a point of no return, ultimately causing irreversible harm. This serves as a warning about the dangers of allowing negative feelings to fester. Communication and honesty are crucial in any relationship. When trust is broken or left unaddressed, it can spiral into something far more destructive than we can imagine. Additionally, the case illustrates the importance of understanding the impact our actions can have on others. Keon's infidelity and failure to address the situation with both Avis and Carla put everyone in a vulnerable position. It highlights the need for individuals to take responsibility for their actions, as they can have far-reaching consequences beyond what we initially perceive. In conclusion, the case of Avis Bank serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of our actions, the importance of open communication, and the need for self-awareness in our relationships. Each character involved presents us with valuable lessons about love, loss, and accountability. It's a story that evokes deep emotions and encourages us to reflect on our own lives and relationships. I feel heartbroken that someone as kind, warm, and talented as Avis Banks had to meet such a tragic end. Let us send our prayers to her and her poor child. That is all the details I could find about the case of Avis Banks. What do you think about this case? What are your thoughts on the court's final verdict? Please share your feelings in the comments below. Thank you for listening to me.